Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay. So, I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for over a year now, and I still can't make sense of it. I'm a rancher in southeastern Oklahoma, been working this land my whole life, and up until March of 2021, I'd have told you that the weirdest thing out here was a stubborn calf, or maybe a coyote getting too bold. But that all changed one evening, and I'm still not sleeping right because of it. It was a typical day in early March, the kind where the air starts to warm up a bit during the day, but the nights still have that chill that makes you grateful for a warm truck or a thick jacket. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd just finished checking the fences along the north pasture and was thinking about heading in for supper. The sun was starting to dip low, casting long shadows across the fields, and everything felt peaceful, like it always does out here. The cattle were grazing calm. The dogs, I've got two, a border collie mix named Buddy and an older mutt I call Scout, were lounging by the porch, and I was just winding down. But then, around maybe 6 in the evening, I noticed the cattle acting off. They're usually pretty mellow, especially that time of day when they're settling in. But they started grouping up near the fence line that borders the ravine, not just milling around, but pacing, like they were nervous about something. A few of them were lowing, that uneasy sound they make when a storm's coming or something's spooking them. I figured it might be a predator. We get bobcats or the occasional bear passing through, though it's rare, so I went out to take a closer look. The ravine's a steep, wooded area that cuts through part of the property, maybe 100 yards from the house. It's dense with oaks and pines, and there's a creek at the bottom that runs after heavy rains. I've always liked the solitude out here, but that evening, the tree line just felt heavy, like the shadows were thicker than usual. I stood there for a bit watching the cattle, and that's when I heard the first sound. A deep, drawn-out roar that came from somewhere in those trees. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before, not a bear's growl, which is more guttural, and not a coyote's howl. This was lower, almost like a combination of a roar and a groan, and it echoed just enough to make the hair on my arm stand up. I called the dogs over, and they immediately started barking, their fur bristling. Buddy, who's usually brave as anything, was backing away from the ravine, whining. Scout just stood there, barking like mad, but he wouldn't go any closer. That's when I knew something was really wrong. Over the next half hour or so, the roars kept coming, mixed with the sound of heavy movement, like something big was crashing through the underbrush. Branches were snapping, not the little twigs you hear from deer, but thick ones, like something was forcing its way through. As it got darker, I decided to turn on the security lights we have around the property. We've got motion-activated ones near the barn and the house, and when one flicked on near the fence line, that's when I saw them. 2 figures, upright and huge, moving across the edge of the pasture. One was taller than any man I've ever seen. I'd guess at least 8 feet. With shoulders so broad they looked almost unnatural. Its arms were long, swinging as it walked, and it had a steady, powerful stride that covered ground fast. Behind it was a smaller one, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall, following close. They were dark, almost black against the fading light, and they moved like they knew exactly where they were going. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I've seen bears on 2 legs before, but this wasn't that. Bears don't walk that smoothly, and they sure as hell aren't that tall. I froze for a second, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. Then the cattle started bellowing in panic, a sound I've only heard a couple times in my life, like when we had a tornado warning and they sensed it coming. They were crowding together, pushing against the fence, and I could see their eyes wide with fear. I ran back to the house to grab a rifle. I keep a .30-06 for emergencies, and my truck keys. By the time I got outside, the security light had shut off, but I could still hear movement out there. Heavy footsteps, crunching on dry leaves, and those roars again, closer now. I jumped into my truck, started the engine, and drove slowly toward the pasture, keeping the headlights off so I could see better with the moonlight. The dogs were still barking, but they'd retreated to the porch, which was unlike them. I parked near the gate to the pasture and just sat there, watching. The moon was out, not full but bright enough to cast shadows, and I could see shapes moving along the ridge above the ravine. It looked like the two figures were working together. One would crouch down, almost like it was scanning the area, while the other descended toward the creek. They moved silently except for the occasional crack of a branch, and it was eerie how coordinated they seemed. No sounds between them, no calls, just this mo-chi, like they didn't need to talk. Then from the ravine, I heard a sharp impact, a loud thud, like something heavy hitting the ground, followed by a sickening crunch. The cattle went dead silent all at once, which was somehow worse than the noise. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the whole world had stopped breathing. I sat there in the truck, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I've been in scary situations before. Once had a bull charge me, another time got caught in a flash flood. But this was different. This was a deep, primal fear, the kind that makes you want to curl up and hide. I stayed in that truck for what felt like hours, just watching and listening. Every little sound made me jump. The wind rustling the grass, an owl hooting in the distance. But the movements along the ridge kept happening. At one point, I saw the taller figure standing on the edge, looking down into the ravine, and I could have sworn its eyes caught the light somehow, glowing a faint red, not like an animal's eye shine, which is usually green or yellow, but a dull red like embers. It sent a chill down my spine that I can still feel when I think about it. I didn't dare get out. I just sat there, engine off, with the rifle across my lap, praying for sunrise. The night dragged on, and eventually the movement stopped. The roars faded, and everything went quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet, tense, like the calm after a storm. I must have dozed off for a bit because the next thing I knew, the sky was starting to lighten in the east, turning from black to gray. As soon as it was light enough to see, I got out of the truck, rifle in hand, and headed toward the ravine. The air was cold and still, and the grass was wet with dew. The cattle were still huddled together, but they were quiet now, just watching me. When I reached the edge of the ravine and looked down, my stomach twisted. 3 of my best steers were lying at the bottom near the creek bed. They weren't torn apart or anything, no blood, no signs of a struggle like you'd see with predators. Their bodies were intact, but they were clearly dead, their necks bent at odd angles, like they'd been forced off the edge. I climbed down carefully, my boots slipping on the wet leaves, and when I got to them, I could see that the ground around was all messed up. Deep footprints, bigger than any I've ever seen, were pressed into the mud. I measured one later with a tape. It was about 15, 16 inches long, with a wide ball and toes that looked almost human-like, but not quite. The brush around was crushed, like something had chased them down, herding them toward the drop. There were broken branches and trampled plants, all leading back up toward the ridge where I'd seen the figures. I stood there for a long time, just staring, trying to process it. My hands were trembling, and I felt this overwhelming sense of violation. This is my land, my home, and something had come in and done this like it was nothing. I kept looking around, half expecting to see those figures watching me, but the woods were silent. The only sounds were the creek trickling and the distant caw of a crow. I ended up dragging the bodies out with the truck later that day, but I didn't call anyone about it. What would I say? That Bigfoot killed my cattle. People would think I'd lost it. But I know what I saw, and the evidence was right there in the mud. Over the next few days, I found more of those footprints around the property, always near the ravine. And once I saw a broken tree branch about 8 feet up, like something had snapped it while moving through. The thing that haunts me the most, though, is the memory of those red eyes glowing in the dark and the way those creatures moved together, like they were hunting or patrolling. It wasn't random. It felt organized, territorial. I've spent my whole life on this land, and I thought I knew every sound, every shadow. But now every time I hear a branch snap or the dogs bark at night, my heart starts racing. I keep a closer watch, but I've never seen them again like that. Part of me is relieved, but part of me is still waiting, wondering if they'll come back. And I still can't explain any of it, not to myself, not to anyone. It's just this gap in my understanding of the world, and it scares me more than anything ever has. Story 2. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural, or monsters, or anything that can't be explained by a reasonable, logical mind. But there are 2 days in my life that are burned into my memory. 2 separate moments, decades apart, that I can't explain away, no matter how hard I've tried. People have called me a liar, or said I was drunk, or just seeing things. But I know what I saw, and I know the fear I felt. It was real. This is about the first time. It was the summer of 1978. I was in my early 20s, just a kid really, and my buddy and I decided to go camping up in the Tahoe National Forest. We'd been there before. It was our spot. We'd pack up his beat-up old station wagon, the one that was more rust than paint, and just disappear for a weekend. No phones, no bosses, no nothing. Just the trees and the quiet. We got there in the afternoon. The sun was high and hot, but under the canopy of those old growth pines it was cool and dim. The air smelled like dust and pine sap. We found our usual clearing, not too far from the road, but far enough that you felt alone. We set up the tent, a simple 2-man dome thing, and got a fire pit ready for later. Everything was normal. It was just another Friday. The weirdness started just before dusk. The light was getting that long golden quality, casting deep shadows through the trees. My friend was messing with the cooler, trying to get the beer on ice, and I was just standing there, looking out into the woods. I've always liked just staring into the forest, watching the way the light moves, looking for shapes in the shadows, and then I saw a shape that wasn't a shadow. It was about 50 yards away, standing between 2 massive, ancient pine trees. At first, my brain didn't know what to do with it. It was tall, maybe 5 feet, but it was stocky, and it was covered, and I mean completely covered, in hair. It wasn't like a bear's fur, it was shaggy, almost like a dirty, matted carpet. The color was a dark, muddy brown, like wet bark. But it was the eyes that got me. They were large. Not huge, not cartoonish, but large for its face. And they were a very dark, intelligent brown. They weren't just reflecting light. They seemed to be absorbing it, and they were locked right on me. My whole body went cold. It was like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water down my back. My heart wasn't just beating fast. It felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I was just frozen, staring at this thing that was staring back at me. It didn't move. It just stood there, perfectly still, one arm slightly out from its body, as if it had been caught in mid-step. The silence was the worst part. The forest is never completely silent, but in that moment, it was. The birds stopped chirping, the insects went quiet. It was like the whole world had paused to watch. "Hey, you gonna help me or just stand there?" My friend called out from behind me. The spell broke. I blinked, and my head snapped towards his voice. "Do you see that?" I whispered, my voice cracking. It was all I could manage. He straightened up and followed my gaze. "See what?" I looked back. The space between the 2 trees was empty. There was something, I said, my voice still a shaky whisper, right there, between those 2 big pines. He squinted, shielding his eyes from the low sun. "A deer, probably just a big buck." "It wasn't a deer," I said, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. I was starting to feel stupid. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe my mind was playing games, but the cold feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. "Well, it's gone now," he said, and went back to the cooler. "Probably spooked it. Come on, help me with this." I stood there for another full minute, just staring at that empty spot. My skin was crawling. The feeling of being watched was so intense it was almost a physical pressure. I knew, with a certainty that felt like a stone in my stomach, that it hadn't been a deer. It hadn't run away. It had just melted back into the shadows. It was there 1 second, and then it was simply gone. The rest of the evening was tense, at least for me. My friend was his usual cheerful self, joking around, cooking hot dogs over the fire. I couldn't relax. Every snap of a twig in the woods made me jump. Every hoot of an owl sent a jolt through me. I kept my flashlight in my lap, my thumb resting on the switch. We sat by the fire for a few hours, drinking beer and talking about nothing important. But I was only half there. My attention was always on the wall of darkness that surrounded our little circle of light. The forest felt different now. It felt occupied. Eventually, we decided to turn in. It was getting cold, and the fire was dying down. We climbed into the tent, zipped it up, and settled into our sleeping bags. I left my flashlight right next to my head. My friend was snoring within minutes, but I just lay there staring up at the dark fabric of the tent ceiling, listening. The sounds of the night are always amplified when you're trying to sleep in a tent. You hear every little rustle, every creak of a branch. For hours I just lay there, my nerves stretched tight, interpreting every noise as a threat. But as time went on and nothing happened, I started to feel a little silly. Maybe it had been a bear, a weird-looking bear. My adrenaline faded, and exhaustion finally took over. I drifted off to sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. One moment I was dead asleep, and the next I was wide awake, my eyes snapping open in the pitch black. My heart was already thumping. I didn't know why I was awake. I just was. And then I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a soft crunch of gravel, like a careful footstep. Then another. It was circling the tent. I held my breath, my entire body rigid. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the location of the sound. It was moving slowly, deliberately. It wasn't the skittering of a raccoon or the light steps of a deer. This was heavy, a solid, weighted tread. Then it stopped, right outside the tent wall, right near my head. I could hear breathing. It was a low, deep, rhythmic sound, like air moving through a large, hollow space. It wasn't panting, it was just breathing, in and out, slow and steady. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move my arms or legs. I couldn't even turn my head to see if my friend was awake. I was just frozen in pure, undiluted terror. My mind was screaming, but my body was a statue. The sound of that breathing was the only thing in the universe. Then it moved away. I heard the footsteps again, crunching softly on the forest floor, moving towards the car. We had parked his station wagon about 20 feet from the tent. It was an old boat of a car. A Chevrolet Impala wagon, solid steel. The footsteps stopped by the car. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just that heavy, waiting silence. And then it happened. It wasn't a tap, it wasn't a scratch. It was a single massive concussive thump. The entire car rocked. I'm not talking about a little shudder. I mean the whole vehicle lurched on its springs. The sound was deafening in the quiet night. A deep, metallic boom that felt like it came from the center of the earth. My friend shot upright in his sleeping bag with a strangled yell. What the hell was that? I still couldn't speak. I just fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I finally got it and clicked it on, the beam slicing through the darkness of the tent. We both scrambled for the tent zipper, our hands tangling in panic. We got it open and tumbled out into the cold night air, shining the flashlight wildly around. There was nothing. The clearing was empty. The forest around us was a wall of impenetrable blackness. The car sat there, silent and still. An animal, my friend whispered, his voice trembling. A bear. I didn't answer. I walked over to the car, my legs feeling like rubber. I shone the light on the side of the station wagon. On the driver's side rear quarter panel, right behind the wheel well, there was a massive fist-sized dent in the metal. The paint was scratched away in long, deep grooves. This was no bear. A bear might scratch a car, but it doesn't punch a single focused dent into solid steel with enough force to rock a 2-ton vehicle. We didn't say another word. We didn't even pack up the tent. We just threw our sleeping bags and the cooler into the back of the wagon, got in, and locked the doors. My friend turned the key and the engine roared to life, the headlights cutting 2 bright paths through the darkness. He slammed it into reverse, spun us around, and we flew down that dirt road as fast as that old car would go, bouncing over ruts and sending gravel flying. We didn't stop until we hit pavement, and we didn't speak until we saw the lights of the first town. We just drove, both of us white-knuckling the dashboard, staring straight ahead, listening to nothing but the sound of the engine and the wind rushing past the windows. That was the first time. It took me years to even talk about it, and when I did, no one believed me. They'd just nod and smile, and I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was making it up, or that I'd been scared by a bear. But I knew. I knew what I saw in those trees, and I knew what hit that car. It was strong, it was smart, and it wanted us to know it was there. And then, almost 20 years later at Lake Shasta, I saw another one. That's a story for another time, but it confirmed everything. It's real. I don't care what anyone says. I've seen it with my own eyes, felt the terror it brings, and I have the memory of that station wagon rocking in the dead of night to remind me that some things in these old forests we just don't understand, and maybe we're not meant to. Story 3. It was one of those perfect Michigan mornings in mid-July, the kind where the air feels clean in your lungs and the sunlight comes through the trees in these warm, dappled patches on the forest floor. My husband and I had been coming to this particular spot along the Yellow Dog River in Marquette County for years, ever since we'd moved up here from downstate. It was our place, quiet, remote, the kind of spot you only find by word of mouth or by getting properly lost a few times. We'd left the house before the sun was fully up, the truck smelling of coffee, bug spray, and damp waders. The drive in on those 2 tracks is always slow, the truck bouncing over roots and through mud holes, branches scraping against the sides. It's a commitment getting to this spot. That's why we like it. You don't just stumble upon it. We got the rod set up, found our rhythm. The trout were biting pretty good that morning. Brookies mostly, with their beautiful, almost painted-looking sides. We had a decent pile going on the stringer in the shallow, cold water near the bank. Our big, white cooler was sitting on a flat rock a few feet away, already holding a few of the bigger ones on ice. The sound was just the river, that constant, gentle rush over rocks, and the occasional whine of our reels. We weren't talking much. We don't when the fishing's good. It's a comfortable silence. It was probably close to 10 in the morning, the sun getting higher, when I first felt it. It's hard to describe, but it wasn't a sound. It was more like a pressure change. Like the feeling you get when you know someone is standing behind you, even though you haven't heard a thing. I stopped mid-cast and just looked across the river. The bank on the other side is steeper, thicker with hemlock and cedar, darker over there. The shadows are deeper, and that's where I saw movement, not the flicker of a bird or the scamper of a squirrel. This was different. It was a slow, deliberate shifting of shape in the deep gloom between 2 big cedar trunks. I lowered my rod. "Hey," I said, quiet, not wanting to spook whatever it was. "Maybe a bear. We see them sometimes." My husband looked over from where he was untangling his line. "What's up?" I just nodded toward the other bank. He followed my gaze, and we both stood there, frozen, watching. Then it stepped out, not all the way, just enough to clear the thickest of the shadows. It was tall, so damn tall, and it was walking upright on two legs. My brain, trying to make sense of it, first screamed, "Bear!" But bears don't walk like that. Their shoulders are huge. Their gait is a roll. This thing, it moved smoothly, cautiously, and it was covered head to toe in this shaggy, dark brown hair. It wasn't black like a bear's often is. It was the color of wet bark. It stopped at the water's edge, maybe 50 feet across from us, and just looked right at us. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't even swallow. This wasn't a bear. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist. It was built, powerful. The shoulders were massive, but they tapered down to a narrower waist. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick like a man's thighs. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, just a darker patch where a face should be, but I could feel its eyes on me. It was studying us. There was an intelligence there that was utterly chilling. This wasn't just an animal looking at potential food. This was a creature assessing a situation. My husband's hand found my arm, his grip tight. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, his voice tight with a fear I'd never heard in him before. I couldn't answer. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. My mouth had gone completely dry. The creature took a step into the water. The river wasn't deep there, just above its ankles, I guess. It moved slowly, deliberately, its head swiveling from us to our cooler, then to the pile of fish on the stringer in the shallows near our feet. It wasn't looking at us as a threat or as prey. It was looking at our fish. It took another step, then another, crossing the river with this unnerving, steady pace. The water barely seemed to slow it down. It was coming right for our side of the bank. "Back up," my husband said, his voice low and urgent. "Slowly, don't run." My legs felt like they were made of wood. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn and bolt, but some deeper, more primal part of my brain understood. Running triggers a chase. We couldn't trigger a chase. We started shuffling backward, our waders making soft, sucking sounds in the mud. Our rods were just left there, leaning against a log. Our tackle box was open. None of that mattered. The creature reached our bank and stepped out of the water. It was even bigger up close. I'm not good with estimating height, but it had to be over 7 feet tall, maybe closer to 8. It was just immense. The smell hit me then. It was a thick, musky odor, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something rotten, mixed with the deep, earthy smell of old forest and damp soil. It was overwhelming. It ignored us completely. Its focus was entirely on the fish. It walked with this heavy, quiet tread over to our cooler. It didn't rip the lid off. It used one of those huge, hair-covered hands. The fingers were long and thick, with what looked like dirty, dark nails, and just lifted the lid like it was nothing. It peered inside, then let the lid drop back into place with a dull thud. Then it turned to the stringer of fish in the water. It bent down, its movements fluid and strangely graceful for something so huge, and picked up the whole stringer. It held it up, looking at the 5 or 6 brook trout dangling there. Then it did something I'll never forget. It made a sound, a low, deep grunt, almost a rumble that seemed to vibrate right through my chest. It wasn't loud, but it was full of satisfaction. It was then that it looked back at us. We were still backing away, maybe 20 feet from it now, up the slight incline toward the 2-track where we'd parked the truck. Its eyes, I could see them now. They were a deep, intelligent brown, set deep under a heavy brow. There was no malice in them, no anger, just a calm, ancient awareness. It knew we were there. It knew we were terrified, and it just didn't care. We were irrelevant compared to the food. It dropped the stringer on the bank and then turned its body fully toward us. My husband's grip on my arm tightened. The truck. Now. We turned, and we started walking as fast as we could without breaking into a run. The path from the riverbank to the 2-track is only about 40 yards, but it felt like a mile. We were crashing through ferns and over fallen branches, our waders clumsy and loud. I dared a glance back. It was following us. It wasn't running. It wasn't charging. It was just walking, matching our pace exactly. It was staying about 20 feet behind us, its long legs easily keeping up with our panicked, hurried walk. Its arms swung at its sides. It was just watching us. The sheer casualness of it was the most terrifying part. It was like we were leading it somewhere. "Don't look back," my husband hissed, pulling me along. "Just get to the truck." My heart was a frantic drum in my ears. I could hear its footsteps now, a soft, heavy thump on the soft ground, a stark contrast to our own clumsy, sloshing steps. I could still smell it, that musky, wild odor clinging to the air around us. The green of our truck appeared through the trees. It was the most beautiful, relieving sight I have ever seen in my life. We reached the passenger side. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the door open. My husband fumbled with his keys, the metallic jangling sounding obscenely loud in the quiet woods. I finally yanked my door open and practically fell inside, scrambling over the center console to the driver's side because my husband was already getting in on his side. He slammed his door, and I slammed mine, and the sound of the locks clicking down was like a prayer. We both sat there, panting, our chests heaving. The windows were already up. We stared out the windshield. The creature had stopped about 15 feet from the front of the truck. It just stood there, looking at us through the glass. It was so close, I could see the texture of its hair, matted in some places, cleaner in others. I could see the powerful muscles moving under its skin as it shifted its weight. It tilted its head, curious. It wasn't threatening us, it was just looking. We were safe. We were in the truck. But the fear didn't go away. It was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. We were trapped in a metal box with this thing just standing there, between us and the only way out. My husband had the keys in his hand, ready to start the engine, but he was frozen. We both were. What if it didn't move? What if it decided to block the road? And then I remembered the fish. The cooler was still back there. The stringer was on the bank. This thing had been interested in the fish, not us. "Throw it some fish," I blurted out, my voice shaky and too high. My husband looked at me like I was crazy. "What?" "The fish! In the back. We had a couple of smaller trout in a bucket in the truck bed, ones we were planning to cook for lunch later. Maybe it'll take them and leave." He didn't argue. He was as terrified as I was. He cranked the window down just a crack, maybe 2 inches. The smell flooded in, stronger than ever. He reached into the back seat, grabbed the whole plastic bucket and shoved it through the window opening. It tipped over, spilling the 2 trout and some river water onto the ground near the front tire. The creature's eyes followed the movement. It took a step forward. My husband yanked the window back up, his knuckles white. The creature walked right up to the front of the truck. It didn't look at us through the windshield anymore. It bent down, its huge frame blocking our view, and I saw one of those massive hairy hands come into view. The fingers were incredibly dexterous. It didn't just scoop up the fish. It picked them up, one in each hand, with a careful, almost delicate grip. It straightened up, holding the trout. It looked at them, then it looked directly at me through the windshield. It was so close I could see the individual wrinkles around its deep-set eyes. There was no smile, no snarl. Its expression was utterly unreadable, just a calm, profound stillness. Then it turned, and it just walked away. It didn't run. It didn't look back. It walked with that same steady, purposeful stride back toward the river, disappearing into the thick undergrowth as if it had never been there at all. We sat in that truck for a long time. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was our ragged breathing slowly starting to calm down. The smell lingered in the truck for hours, even with the windows closed. Eventually, my husband started the engine. We drove out of there, bouncing down that 2-track, not saying a word until we hit the paved road. We've been back to that spot since. The fishing is still good. We never saw it again. We never found any huge footprints, never heard any strange calls in the night. It was just that one morning, but I can't forget it. I can't forget the way it moved, the way it smelled, the intelligent calm in its eyes. It wasn't a monster, it was just an animal, a big, smart animal that was hungry and knew we had food. That's what I tell myself to make it less frightening, but it doesn't work. The memory of it, standing right there so close I could have reached out and touched it if the glass hadn't been between us. That feeling of being looked at by something that knows you're there, that understands what you are, but is completely and utterly outside of your world. That feeling never goes away. It just sits there in the back of my mind every time we go into the woods. Story 4. Okay, so I need to get this out. I've been reading this forum for a while, mostly just lurking. But something happened to me a few months back and I can't shake it. I haven't told many people because, well, who'd believe me? But I figure if anyone might, it's you all. It was a Thursday night, late, must have been around 11. I remember because my friend and I had just finished a closing shift at the restaurant we worked at, and we were both dead tired. We'd been on our feet for 9 hours straight, and all I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. The rain had started about an hour before we left, one of those steady, soaking Florida rains that just decides to hang around for a while. Not a crazy thunderstorm, just a constant dreary downpour that makes everything look blurred and smeared. We were on the highway heading back towards my place. It's a road I've driven 1,000 times, probably more. It cuts through a pretty wooded area for a good 10 miles or so before you hit the suburbs. Normally it's fine, even relaxing at night. But that night, with the rain, it was different. The visibility was just crap. My wipers were on the fastest setting, thumping back and forth, but they just couldn't keep up. The world outside the windshield was just a tunnel of dark asphalt, and the vague, dark shapes of trees swallowed by the rain and the spray from other cars. The yellow lane dividers were the only thing that felt solid, glowing under the headlights. My friend was in the passenger seat, slumped against the window, half asleep. The radio was on low, some talk station just filling the silence. I was gripping the wheel a little tighter than usual, leaning forward, squinting to see past the arc of the wipers. The tires made that wet humming sound on the pavement, a sound you stop hearing until you really listen for it. We were coming up on a bend. It's a gentle curve, not a sharp turn, but it hides the road ahead for a few seconds. As I started into it, my high beam swept across the shoulder on the right-hand side, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain did what brains do. It tried to make sense of the information. It registered a shape, a tall, dark shape, right on the edge of the tree line. A person, I thought. Some idiot walking on the highway in the pouring rain. My foot even lifted off the gas a little, a reflex. Maybe their car broke down. It happens, but as we got closer, maybe 50, 60 yards away, the shape resolved. And the person idea just shattered. It was standing just off the gravel shoulder, right where the woods began. And it was huge. I don't mean tall like a basketball player, I mean massive. It had to be over 7 feet tall, easy. Its head and shoulders were just abnormally broad and thick. It was covered in hair, long, matted, dirty-looking hair. In the glare of my headlights, wet from the rain, it had a kind of yellowish, almost greyish tint to it. It wasn't clean or uniform like an animal's coat. It was shaggy and clumped, like it had been rolling in mud and leaves, and draped over its shoulders and part of its back was this piece of material. A tarp, maybe, or a big sheet of black plastic. It was just hanging there, wet and shiny, like it had been thrown over it or it had picked it up somewhere. The plastic was flapping a little in the wind, but the thing itself was perfectly still. It was standing sideways to the road, its head turned, looking right across the highway into the woods on the other side. It was poised, like it was just about to step out, to cross. Its posture wasn't casual. It wasn't someone waiting for a bus. It was a hunter waiting for the right moment. The sheer size of it, the way it was just planted there, it was all wrong. The proportions were off. The arms were too long, the head wasn't quite right, too low on the shoulders, and it seemed to have no real neck. A coldness washed over me that had nothing to do with the car's AC. It was a deep, gut-level chill. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't scream. I didn't say a word. I just stared, my eyes locked on this thing. My hands were frozen on the steering wheel. Time didn't slow down, that's a cliché. It just became very, very sharp and focused. The thump of the wipers, the hiss of the tires, the drone of the radio. It all faded into a dull buzz behind the roaring in my ears. We were closing the distance fast. 30 yards, 20. I could see more details now, and I wish I couldn't. The way the rain plastered the hair to its body, revealing the sheer bulk underneath. The way the head was just a dark shape, no clear face, just a suggestion of features in shadow. The sheer, overwhelming presence of it. It wasn't just an animal. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was something else entirely, something that felt ancient and out of place, and deeply, deeply wrong. And then we were passing it. My car, a little Honda Civic, felt like a toy next to it. For a split second, we were parallel. I was too scared to turn my head and look directly out the passenger window. I just saw it in my peripheral vision, a monstrous silhouette against the dark wall of trees. I stomped on the gas, the engine whined, and the car surged forward, speeding us away from that spot. The second we were past, the spell broke. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The road behind was just a tunnel of darkness and rain. The shape was gone, swallowed up by the night. That's when my friend spoke. His voice was quiet, shaky. "Dude." I looked over at him. He was no longer slumped. He was bolt upright, his hands braced on the dashboard, his knuckles white. His face was pale. "You saw that, right?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I managed to croak out. My throat was dry. "Yeah, I saw it." "What the hell was that?" I just shook my head. I had no words. Then, without planning it, we started comparing notes. It wasn't a conversation, it was us spitting out fragments, trying to piece it together, to confirm we hadn't both lost our minds. "It was huge," I said. "So tall," he agreed, his voice still shaky. "Its shoulders, they were like massive," I finished for him. "The hair," he said, "long, kinda yellowish, right? And wet." "Yeah, and that thing on its back, the plastic. The top, yeah, what the hell was that?" We went back and forth like that for a minute, our voices tight with a fear that was now shared, confirmed. We had both seen the exact same impossible thing, the same height, the same hair, the same tarp, the same poised, ready-to-cross posture. There was no doubt. It was real. We drove in silence for another mile, the only sound the rain and the wipers. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. We were both staring straight ahead, but I could feel him vibrating with the same adrenaline that was coursing through me. Then he said the thing we were both thinking. Should we turn around? The thought had already flickered in my mind, a crazy, morbid curiosity, but hearing it out loud made my stomach clench. Go back, drive back towards that. What if it was still there? What if it was in the road this time? What if it was closer? "No," I said, and the word came out more forceful than I intended. "No way." He didn't argue. He just nodded, a quick, jerky motion. "Yeah, you're right." And that was it. We both knew we weren't going back. The courage just wasn't there. It was pure, unadulterated fear. The kind that sits in your gut and tells you that some things are not meant to be looked at twice. The rest of the drive home was quiet. The easy tiredness from work was gone, replaced by a wired, jittery alertness. Every shadow at the side of the road made me flinch. Every shape in the trees looked like it was moving. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes or that massive, shaggy form loping after the car. I drove 10 miles over the speed limit the whole way, my hands aching from how hard I was gripping the wheel. I dropped my friend off at his apartment. We didn't say much, just a quick, "See you tomorrow," and a look that said everything we weren't saying, a look of shared, bewildered terror. I got home, locked the door behind me, and went through the motions. Shower, PJs, but I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, seeing that thing standing in the rain. Every time I closed my eyes, the image was burned into my brain, the way it stood, so still and yet so full of intent, the way the plastic tarp flapped, the sheer non-human scale of it. For months after that, I couldn't bring myself to drive on that highway at night. I'd take the long way home, a route that added an extra 20 minutes to my drive, through lit-up suburban streets with strip malls and stoplights. It felt safer, more controlled. Even during the day, driving that stretch of road made my heart beat faster. I'd find myself scanning the tree line, my eyes darting to the shoulder where I'd seen it, half expecting it to still be there, waiting. That's what haunts me the most, I think. Not just what it was, but what it was doing. It wasn't just standing there, it was waiting. It was looking across the road, into the woods on the other side, like it had a destination, like it had a purpose, and we had just happened to drive by at the exact moment it was poised to step out of its world and into mine. I've tried to rationalize it. A bear in central Florida, standing upright in the rain with a tarp on its back. No. A person. No one is that tall, that built, and why would they be standing alone on a deserted highway in a storm covered in filth and plastic? It doesn't fit. So I'm left with this, a single terrifying image from a rainy night, a moment that lasted maybe 10 seconds, but rewired something in my head. The feeling of safety I used to have on familiar roads is just gone, shattered. Now when I drive at night, especially when it's raining, I'm not just watching the road, I'm watching the darkness at the edges, wondering what else might be standing there, just out of sight, waiting to cross. Story 5. This particular morning, it was my wife who got up. It was still pitch black out, must have been around 4 in the morning. The deepest part of the night, when everything is so quiet it almost hums. I was dead asleep, the kind of sleep where you're just gone, you know? But I woke up instantly when the door slammed. Not like a normal close, but a hard, frantic shove. The whole cabin shook. I sat bolt upright in bed. My heart was already hammering. I could hear her breathing, this ragged, panicked sound from just inside the door. It was the kind of breathing you hear when someone's trying not to scream. "What? What is it?" I said, my voice all gravel from sleep. She didn't answer right away. I could just make out her shape in the dark, standing frozen by the door. I fumbled for the battery-powered lantern on the bedside table and clicked it on. The light hit her and I swear my blood went cold. Her face was white, completely drained of color. Her eyes were wide, staring at nothing, just fixed on the wall. She was shaking, not a little shiver, but a full-body tremble, like she'd been dunked in ice water. "There was something out there," she finally whispered. Her voice was thin, stretched tight with fear. I swung my legs out of bed. "An animal? A bear?" "We get black bears around sometimes, but they're usually shy." She shook her head, a quick, jerky movement. "No, it wasn't an animal. It was walking." I remember just staring at her, trying to process that. It was walking. What does that even mean? A person? At 4 in the morning out here? "Where?" I asked, my own voice dropping to a whisper. "By the corner of the cabin. I was going to the outhouse. I came around the corner and it was just there." I got up and went to her. I put my hands on her shoulders and she flinched. She was ice cold. "Tell me exactly what you saw." She took another shaky breath. It was tall, really tall, and dark, a dark grey color, like wet stone. It was moving, like purposefully. Not wandering, it knew where it was going. It was only about 7 feet away from me. I stopped dead. I couldn't even breathe. She described how it was moving upright, on 2 legs, and it was fast. Not running, but a quick, powerful stride that covered ground, and she said it was making a noise. When I asked her what kind of noise, she just shook her head again, frustrated. I can't describe it. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a hum. It was just a sound, a low sound. I felt it in my chest. That's what got me. The sound she felt in her chest. That wasn't her being dramatic. That was a physical memory. I knew I had to go look. You can't just hear that and roll over and go back to sleep. I pulled on my jeans and a jacket, grabbed the big Maglite flashlight, the heavy metal one that feels like you could club a man with it, and I went to the door. "Don't go out there," she whispered, her hand on my arm. "I'll just look from the porch," I said, but we both knew I was going to have to go further than that. I opened the door slowly. The outside air was cool and damp, smelling of pine and wet earth. It was absolutely silent. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. That was the first wrong thing. At that time of year, the woods are never that quiet. It was a dead silence, a held breath kind of silence. I stepped onto the porch, the old wood creaking under my feet. I swept the flashlight beam across the yard. Nothing. Just the long grass, the dark shapes of trees, the little path leading to the outhouse. I played the light along the tree line. The beam didn't penetrate very far. It just lit up the first layer of trunks and then got swallowed by the blackness. I walked down the porch steps, my senses screaming. Every little sound I made, the crunch of my feet on the gravel path, the rustle of my jacket, seemed incredibly loud. I walked slowly towards the corner of the cabin where she'd seen it. The ground was soft there, a mix of dirt and moss. I shone the light down, looking for tracks, and I found something. It wasn't a clear print, not like in the movies. It was more of a disturbance. A patch of moss was scuffed up, and pressed into the soft soil next to it was a depression. It was long, way too long to be a human foot, and broad. It didn't have a clear shape, just a deep impression, like something very heavy had stood there and pushed off hard. My mouth went dry. I followed the direction it would have gone, sweeping the light back and forth. About 10 feet away, near the edge of the woods, I saw a broken branch on a young sapling. It was snapped clean, about 5 feet off the ground. Something tall had passed through there, and in a hurry. I stood there for a long time, just listening. The silence was oppressive. It felt like the whole forest was watching me. I could feel the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck standing up. This wasn't the feeling of being alone. This was the feeling of being not alone. It's a different thing entirely. It's a primal feeling, a cold knot in your gut that tells you something is very, very close, and you can't see it. I finally went back inside, locking the door behind me. My wife was sitting on the edge of the bed, just waiting. I didn't have to say anything. She saw it on my face. "You saw something," she said. "I don't know what I saw," I said, and that was the truth. But something was there. We sat there in the dim lantern light as the sky outside began to turn from black to deep blue. We didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. This wasn't the first weird thing to happen out here, not by a long shot. It was just the closest, the most in our faces. We've been coming to this cabin for over a decade. For years it's been little things. Sounds mostly. You get used to the normal night sounds. The owls, the coyotes yipping in the distance. But these were different. There were the screams. That's what we called them, because we didn't have another word for it. They'd come from deep in the valley, usually late at night. It didn't sound like any animal we knew. It wasn't a coyote, wasn't a bobcat. Those sounds are chilling, but you can place them. This was wrong. It was a high-pitched, wavering shriek that sometimes sounded almost human, but stretched and twisted into something that made your skin crawl. It was a sound of pure rage or pure terror. We could never tell which. It would echo through the hills and then just stop. And the silence afterward felt heavier than before. Then there were the wood knocks. You'd be sitting around the fire pit in the evening, and from the ridge above the cabin you'd hear a loud thwack, the sound of a big branch or a log being slammed against a tree trunk. Once, twice, Sometimes 3 times in a row. You'd look at each other and you'd both know no one was up there. It was too steep, too dense. We'd shout, "Hello?" but you'd never get an answer. Just more silence. But the most physical thing before this morning happened about 2 years earlier. We have an old Winnebago we keep on a concrete pad next to the cabin for extra guests. One night we were inside it playing cards. It was around 11 o'clock. We were the only ones there. Out of nowhere, something hit the side of the Winnebago. I don't mean a tap. I mean a massive, solid thump that rocked the whole vehicle on its springs. The plates in the cupboard rattled. We both froze. It came from the side facing the woods, the darkest part of the property. I grabbed a flashlight and a hatchet that time, my heart in my throat. I yanked the door open and shone the light out. Nothing. I walked around the Winnebago. There was a fresh, deep dent in the aluminum siding, about 6 feet long, feet off the ground. Something big and solid had slammed into it. There were no rocks around that could have done it, no fallen branches. Just this one huge dent. We slept in the main cabin that night with all the lights on. Sitting there on the bed as the sun came up on that Memorial Day weekend, all those other incidents came rushing back. They weren't just isolated weird stories anymore. They were a pattern. This thing, whatever it was, had been around us for years, hanging back in the trees, making its presence known in these bizarre, unsettling ways. And this morning my wife had almost walked right into it. The rest of that day was off. We went through the motions. We made coffee, we cooked breakfast on the propane stove, but we were both jumpy. Every little noise from outside made us freeze and look at each other. We didn't venture far from the cabin. I kept looking out the windows, scanning the tree line. It was a bright, sunny day, but the woods felt dark and full. I kept thinking about that figure she described, dark grey, moving purposefully upright, the impression in the soil, the broken branch. My mind kept trying to fit it into a box, a bear, a moose, though we don't have moose here, a person in a weird coat, but none of it fit. A bear doesn't walk that upright or that fast. A person doesn't make a sound you feel in your chest. A person doesn't leave a single, massive impression like that and then vanish without a trace. The worst part was the purpose she mentioned. It wasn't shuffling or foraging. It was moving. It had intent. What was it doing? Where was it going? Was it just passing through, or was it checking on us? The thought that it might have been watching the cabin, that it knew our routines, that it knew she would be coming out at that time. That thought was colder than any fear of a random animal. We tried to talk about it rationally, but there is no rationality for something like that. You're left with just the raw experience, the facts as you witnessed them, and the gut-deep, bone-level certainty that what you saw was real and was wrong. We ended up leaving a day early. We just packed our stuff, locked up the cabin, and got in the truck. As we drove down the dirt road away from the place, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a tall, dark, grey shape standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us go. We still go to the cabin. It's our place. We're not going to be driven out, but we're different now. We're more alert. We listen more carefully to the sounds of the night. We don't take solo walks after dark. We keep the big mag light by the door, not just for light, but for the weight of it in my hand. And we've accepted it. That's the only way I can put it. We've accepted that there are things in these woods that we don't understand. Unexplained occurrences, mysteries. That thing is out there. We don't know what it is. We don't know what it wants. We just know that it's real. Sometimes late at night when the woods go quiet for no reason, I'll look over at my wife and I can see she's listening too, remembering that cold grey morning, the shape in the dark, and the sound she felt more than heard. We don't talk about it much. We don't have to. It's just a part of our lives now, a chill that never really goes away. Story 6. It was a Friday morning, I remember, because I'd taken the day off work. I packed my usual gear, A sturdy backpack with water, some snacks, a first aid kit, my camera, a decent DSLR I use for landscape shots, a powerful flashlight with extra batteries, and my folding knife, which I always carry more out of habit than anything else. I'm not some survivalist nut. I just like being prepared. The drive up was rough, way rougher than I expected. The road was this narrow, unpaved track that wound up into a high valley, and my truck, a beat-up old Ford, was struggling a bit with the altitude. I was at around 9,500 feet when I finally pulled over near what I thought was the mine entrance. The air was thin and cool, with this low mist hanging over everything like a ghostly blanket. What struck me right away was the silence. I mean, deep woods are usually quiet, but this was different. No birds, no wind rustling the pines, just this heavy, unnerving stillness that made the hair on my arms stand up. I got out of the truck and stretched, trying to shake off the creepiness. That's when I saw the tracks. They were in the damp dirt near the mine entrance, and they stopped me dead in my tracks, no pun intended. They were huge, like nothing I'd ever seen. Human-like, but way too big. Each one was deep, like whatever made them was heavy, and they were spaced far apart, like it had taken massive strides. I'm 6 feet tall and my own footprints looked tiny next to these. My heart started beating a little faster, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was a bear, I thought, though bears don't leave prints that look so human. I snapped a couple of photos with my camera just in case, but part of me was already feeling this low thrum of anxiety. I remember thinking, okay, Daniel, don't be a wuss. You've handled worse. But something felt off, like the woods were holding their breath. The mine entrance was a dark hole in the side of the mountain, partly collapsed, but still passable. I geared up, clicked on my flashlight, and stepped inside. The air changed instantly. It was cooler, damp, with that earthy smell of wet rock and decay. The tunnel was narrow, maybe 6 feet wide, and the ceiling was low enough that I had to duck in places. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off old timber supports that looked like they could give way any second. I could hear my own breathing way too loud, and the crunch of my boots on gravel echoed in a way that made me jumpy. I kept telling myself to stay calm, but my palms were sweaty, and I had this tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. I've been in plenty of caves and mines before, but this one felt different, like it was watching me. I walked maybe 50 yards in, shining the light around, looking for any signs of the old mining equipment. I saw some rusted tools, a broken cart, but nothing too exciting. Then I heard it, a faint scuffling sound, like something dragging over rock. It came from deeper in the tunnel. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Probably a rodent, I muttered to myself. But it didn't sound like any rodent I'd ever heard. It was heavier, more deliberate. I shone the light ahead, but the beam didn't reach far enough. The darkness just swallowed it up. The scuffling came again, closer this time, and I felt a chill run down my spine. That's when I decided to bail. I'm not ashamed to admit it. My gut was screaming at me to get out. I turned around to head back to the entrance, and that's when I saw it. Blocking the way out was this dark, motionless figure. At first, my brain couldn't process it. I thought it was a shadow, or maybe a trick of the light, but then it moved. Just a slight shift, but enough to make me realize it was real. My flashlight beam hit it full on, and I swear my blood ran cold. It was tall, way over 8 feet, with broad shoulders and a thick torso covered in dark, matted hair. Its head was conical, almost pointed, and its eyes, they glinted in the light, like two shiny beads staring right at me. I couldn't see a face, just those eyes and the outline of something massive and powerful. It didn't make a sound at first, just stood there, and I felt this primal fear wash over me. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to lean against the tunnel wall to keep from collapsing. The creature took a step forward, and I could see how intelligent it was. The way it moved was deliberate, like it knew exactly what it was doing. It wasn't some mindless animal. It was cornering me. I was trapped, with this thing between me and the outside world. My mind raced. What the hell was it? Bigfoot. I'd heard stories, but I never believed them. Now, faced with it, I couldn't deny what I was seeing. It exhaled, and the sound was deep and guttural, like rocks grinding together. The smell hit me then, musky, earthy, like wet dog and soil, but stronger, overwhelming. I could feel the vibration of its breath in the air, and my own breath caught in my throat. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the flashlight. Then it roared. I can't even describe it properly. It was this deafening, chesty blast that seemed to come from deep inside it. The sound vibrated through the tunnel, so loud that my ears rang, and I felt it in my bones. Dust and small rocks showered down from the ceiling, and for a second I thought the whole place was going to collapse. The roar echoed, filling the space until I couldn't hear anything else. It was pure terror, the kind that freezes you solid. I was paralyzed, just staring at this thing, knowing I was seconds from dying. Its eyes never left me, and in that moment, I saw intelligence there, not animal, but something else, something that understood exactly what was happening. My survival instincts kicked in, thank God. I remembered reading somewhere that loud noises can distract animals. So without thinking, I grabbed a loose rock from the ground and hurled it against the tunnel wall to my left. It hit with a sharp crack, and the creature's head snapped toward the sound. That was my chance. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted past it, my boots slipping on the gravel, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I could feel the heat of its body as I brushed by, smell that musky odor up close, and then I was out, bursting into the sunlight. I didn't look back. I just ran for my truck, fumbled with the keys, and jumped in, locking the doors like that would do anything. My hands were trembling so bad, I could barely get the key in the ignition. I peeled out, spraying dirt everywhere, and didn't stop until I was back on the main road. I drove straight home, shaking the whole way. When I got back to Colorado Springs, I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? But a couple days later, I found the number for a local researcher who dealt with weird sightings and called him anonymously. I gave him the location, described the tracks, and hung up. Later, I heard through the grapevine that investigators went up there and found these massive tracks, 17 inches long, and fresh damage in the mine, like something big had been tearing at the supports. Knowing that didn't make me feel better, though. It just confirmed that I wasn't crazy. To this day, I haven't gone back to the backcountry. I used to love hiking, but now the woods just feel different. I have dreams about that thing, about its eyes and that roar, and sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat. What gets me the most is the intelligence I saw in it, the way it seemed to size me up like it was thinking. I can't explain it, and I don't try to. All I know is that I was in that tunnel with something that wasn't supposed to exist, and it changed me forever. I still have the photos of the tracks, but I never look at them. It's just this thing that happened, and now it's over. But it's not really over, you know? It's always there in the back of my mind. Story 7. Okay, so this is something I've never really talked about online before, but I've been reading through this forum for a while now, and I figure it's time to get it off my chest. This happened back in the fall of 2003 in LaSalle County, Illinois. I was out hunting by myself like I did most weekends back then. I've always been a pretty solitary guy, and hunting was my way to clear my head, you know? Just me, my rifle, and my dog, a big German shepherd named Duke. He was my shadow, never left my side. That day started out like any other. It was a crisp morning in late October, the kind where the air smells like damp leaves and wood smoke, and you can see your breath hanging in front of you. I'd gotten up before dawn, around 5 in the morning, loaded up my truck, and driven out to this spot I knew pretty well, a stretch of woods off a dirt road near the Illinois River. It wasn't super remote, but it was quiet enough that I rarely ran into other hunters. The leaves were mostly down by then, so the ground was covered in this crunchy carpet of brown and orange, and the trees were just skeletons against the grey sky. I remember thinking it was perfect deer weather, cool enough to keep them moving, but not so cold that I'd be miserable. I parked the truck at the edge of an old logging trail, grabbed my gear, and Duke and I headed in. The sun was just starting to come up, casting this weak, pale light through the trees. Everything was quiet at first, just the sound of our footsteps and the occasional rustle of squirrels. Duke was trotting ahead of me, his ears perked up, tail wagging. He loved these trips as much as I did. We'd been out for maybe an hour or so, not seeing much, just enjoying the peace. I remember stopping to take a drink from my water bottle, the plastic cold against my lips, and scanning the woods with my binoculars. Nothing but trees and shadows. Then, around 8 in the morning, we came to this clearing I'd hunted before. It was maybe 100 yards across, edged with thick underbrush and a few tall oaks. The grass was knee-high and brown, swaying a little in the breeze. I decided to settle down on a fallen log at the edge, thinking I might wait there for a bit to see if any deer came through. Duke sat beside me, panting softly, his breath making little clouds. I remember feeling pretty relaxed, just watching the light change as the sun got higher. That's when I first noticed something off. Duke's ears twitched, and he let out this low growl, not his usual bark at a squirrel or bird. It was deeper, more of a rumble in his chest. I looked over at him, and his body was tense, his hackles up. I figured maybe it was a coyote or something, so I stayed still, scanning the tree line. At first, I didn't see anything, just the same old woods. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement along the far edge of the clearing. There were 4 of them. I know how crazy that sounds, but I swear it's true. They were upright, walking on 2 legs, and covered in this thick, dark brown hair that looked almost black in the shadows. The tallest one had to be around 8 feet tall. I'm 6 feet even, and it towered over me even from a distance. The others were a bit shorter, but one was definitely smaller, maybe 6 feet or so, like a juvenile or something. They were moving in a loose line, kind of shuffling along the edge of the clearing, not fast but steady. Their arms swung a little as they walked, and the hair on them was so long it almost brushed the ground. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I froze, my hand tightening on my rifle. I didn't even breathe for a second. Duke was still growling, but it was quieter now, like he was scared too. I could feel his body pressed against my leg, trembling. I've seen bears before, and these weren't bears. Bears don't walk like that, upright and in a line. These things moved almost gracefully, like they belonged there. They were about 50 yards away, and I could see them pretty clearly through my binoculars. The hair was matted and dirty, like it hadn't been cleaned in years, and it covered their whole bodies. I couldn't make out faces, just dark shapes where their heads should be, but I got the impression of broad shoulders and powerful builds. The tallest one was in the lead, and the others followed, the smaller one lagging a bit behind. They didn't make a sound. No grunts, no snapping twigs, nothing. It was eerie, like they were gliding over the ground. I just sat there, my mind racing. Part of me was trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was people in costumes or some kind of prank. But who the hell would be out here in the middle of nowhere, dressed like that at 8 in the morning? And why would they be moving like that? It didn't make sense. Another part of me was screaming that this was something else, something I'd heard stories about but never believed. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. Then the lead figure turned its head. Not its whole body, just its head, and it looked right at me. I don't know how to describe it, but in that moment, I felt like it knew I was there, like it had been aware of me the whole time. A wave of pure fear shot through me, so intense that my legs went weak. I could feel the cold sweat breaking out on my forehead, and my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my binoculars. Duke let out this whimper and crouched lower, his growl turning into a scared whine. The figure didn't stare for long, maybe a second or two, but it felt like an eternity. Then it turned back and kept walking, and the others followed. They didn't run or hurry. They just moved into the thicker woods on the other side of the clearing, disappearing into the shadows like they'd never been there. I stayed frozen on that log for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a minute or two. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I was breathing in shallow gasps. Duke was still pressed against me, quiet now, but I could feel him shaking. I didn't move until they were completely out of sight. Even then, I was terrified they might come back. I slowly stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and scanned the woods with my binoculars again. Nothing, just empty trees and that same quiet. The clearing looked normal again, but the air felt different, heavier, like something had sucked all the life out of it. I remember the smell too. There was this weird musky odor hanging in the air, kind of like wet dog, but stronger, more pungent. It made my nose wrinkle. I knew I had to get out of there. I wasn't about to follow them or try to get a better look. Hell no. I grabbed my gear, called Duke to heel, and started walking back the way we came. My steps were quick and clumsy, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see one of them behind me. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, and once a branch snapped somewhere to my left, and I almost screamed. Duke was sticking close, his tail between his legs, not even pretending to be brave anymore. The walk back to the truck felt twice as long as the walk in. The woods that had felt so peaceful earlier now seemed menacing, like every shadow was hiding something. I kept my rifle ready, my finger near the trigger, even though I knew deep down that if they'd wanted to hurt me, they could have. But they didn't. They just left. That almost made it worse, the fact that they seemed so indifferent, like I was just part of the scenery. When I finally reached the truck, I threw my gear in the back, shoved Duke into the passenger seat, and got the hell out of there. I didn't even bother checking if I'd locked the doors. I just drove, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. The whole way home, I kept replaying it in my head, the way they moved, the way that lead figure turned and looked at me. That look, it wasn't angry or threatening, just aware, like it was acknowledging my presence and then moving on. But the fear it sparked was real, deep in my bones. I got back to my house around noon and I was still shaking. I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I say? Hey, I saw Bigfoot today. They'd think I was nuts, so I kept it to myself, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those figures moving through the clearing, and that head turning toward me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs, or a group of hunters playing a trick. But bears don't walk in a line like that, and they don't have that kind of posture. And hunters? No way. Not out there. Not moving that silently. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I saw was real. It solidified something in me, a belief that there are things out there we don't understand, things that live in the wild places we think we know. I've never gone back to that spot, not once in all these years. I still hunt, but I stick to more open areas, places where I can see for miles. Every time I'm in the woods now, I'm on edge, listening for sounds that don't belong, watching for movement in the shadows. Duke passed away a few years ago, but even when he was alive, he never acted like that again. That day changed something in both of us. The memory is still sharp, like it happened yesterday. I can still smell that musky odor, feel the cold sweat on my skin, see the way that figure turned its head. I don't know what they were, and I probably never will. But I know what I saw, and it's made me cautious in those familiar lands ever since. Sometimes when I'm out in the woods alone, I'll get this feeling like I'm being watched, and I'll remember that day in fall 2003, and the fear comes rushing back. I just pack up and leave early, every time. Story 8. All right, I've been sitting on this for years, and I guess it's time to get it out there. I've never posted anything like this online before, but after reading some of your stories, I feel like I'm not alone in this. My name isn't important. I'm just a retired engineer living in Portage County, Ohio, and what happened to me back in 2009 still messes with my head. I'm writing this all down in one go because if I stop, I might not finish. It's all tied to one day, the day I saw something I can't explain, and everything before it built up to that moment. It was a day in late May, around 3 months after all the weirdness started. I remember because the weather had finally warmed up and the snow was long gone, but the memory of it was stuck in my mind like a splinter. That morning, I woke up feeling off, like something was itching at the back of my neck. I'd been having trouble sleeping since February, ever since the first big snowfall that year. I'm a practical guy, spent my career fixing machines and solving problems, so I don't jump to wild conclusions. But what I saw that day in May made me question everything. Let me back up a bit, because it all started with the snow. In early February 2009, we had a heavy snowfall that buried everything. I'm talking deep, crisp snow that made the world quiet, the kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. I've always liked walking around our property after a snowstorm. It's peaceful. Our home is in a clustered community, meaning the houses are close together, backed by woods that stretch out for acres. That morning, I pulled on my boots and went out back just to check things out. The sun was bright, glaring off the snow, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. But these weren't normal footprints. They were bipedal, like a person's, but the stride was way too long. I mean, I'm 6 feet tall, and when I walk, my steps are maybe 2-3 feet apart, depending on the terrain. These tracks had a stride that was even and consistent, like whoever made them was just gliding over the snow. They came out of the woods and went right up toward the backs of the houses. I followed them for a bit, and even where the ground was uneven, little dips and rises, the stride didn't change. It was creepy, like watching a robot walk, but organic, if that makes sense. I went back inside and called my wife over. She's always been the skeptical type, thinks I worry too much. I showed her the tracks from the window, and she shrugged, said they looked unusual, but probably just some kid messing around, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The prints were too big, too precise. Later that week, my son came to visit. He's in his 20s fit, and he loves a challenge. I told him about the tracks, and he laughed, said I was seeing things. So we went out back, and he tried to match the stride. He's got size 11 boots, and he stretched his legs as far as he could, but he fell short by a good 1.5 feet. That's when it hit me. This wasn't human. The prints themselves were huge, with splayed toes, almost like a bear's. But bears don't walk on 2 legs for that long, and there was no side-to-side stagger, like how people wobble when they walk. These tracks were straight as an arrow, like they were made by something that knew exactly where it was going. We followed them again, and that's when the real fear set in. The tracks went right up to the back windows of several homes in our community, mine included. They'd approach the window in a straight line, pause, then turn and go back to the woods. It wasn't random, it felt purposeful, like surveillance. I remember standing there, the cold seeping through my boots, and feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. My son didn't say much after that. He just looked spooked. A few days later, I went out to investigate further. The snow had hardened, and the impressions were still clear. I knelt down and looked closely. The prints were punched vertically into the snow, no drag marks at all. When people walk, their heels scrape a bit, or their toes push the snow forward. But these were clean, like something heavy had been placed straight down and lifted straight up. I took measurements. The prints were about 18 inches long, and the stride was over 5 feet. I'm an engineer. I know about weight distribution and gait. This wasn't adding up. About a week after that, I was taking out the garbage around midnight. It was dead quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy. Then I heard it, a distant wail that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't a coyote or a fox. I've heard those all my life. This was deeper, more guttural, like something from those Bigfoot recordings you hear about online. It echoed through the woods, and I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I stood there for what felt like forever, but it didn't come again. I went back inside, and my wife asked if I was okay. I just shook my head. I didn't want to scare her. Now, back to that day in May. The snow had melted months ago, and spring had brought green back to the woods. But I couldn't shake the unease. I'd been avoiding the back areas, sticking to the front of the house, or driving when I needed to go out. That afternoon, I had to run an errand, so I got in my car and took the road that loops near a marsh about half a mile from our community. It's a spot I've driven past 1,000 times, usually just seabirds or the occasional deer. The marsh is dense with vegetation, tall reeds and shrubs that can hide a lot. I was driving slow, maybe 20 miles an hour, just taking in the scenery, when I saw it. On the edge of the marsh, there was this shape. It was impenetrably black, like a hole in the world, and it was about 2 feet above the vegetation. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from a tree, but there weren't any trees tall enough right there. I slowed down almost to a stop, rolling down my window to get a better look. The shape wasn't moving. It was just there, solid and dark. It didn't have any features I could make out. No eyes, no limbs, just this black mass that stood out against the green and brown of the marsh. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my breathing got shallow. I'm not prone to panic, but in that moment, I was terrified. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs, or a weird pile of debris. But bears move, they sway, they make noise. This thing was utterly still, and it was too tall. I estimated it was around 7 or 8 feet high, given how it rose above the plants. The blackness of it was what got me. It absorbed the light, like it was made of something that didn't reflect anything. I sat there for what felt like minutes, but it was probably only seconds. My car was idling, and I could hear the engine humming, but otherwise everything was quiet. No birds, no wind, just silence. Then, without any warning, the shape was gone. Not like it moved away, it just vanished, like someone turned off a switch. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but the spot was empty. The vegetation was undisturbed. No rustling, no footprints, nothing. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. When I got back, I didn't tell my wife right away. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the woods. All those earlier incidents came flooding back. The tracks in the snow, the wail, and now this. It felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. I went back to the marsh the next day, walked around, but there was nothing. No signs, no tracks, no broken plants. Whatever it was gone. That was the last time anything happened. No more tracks, no more sounds, no more sightings. But it left me convinced that there's something out there, something that doesn't fit into what I know. As an engineer, I'm trained to look for evidence, to trust data. But this defies explanation. I've spent years going over it in my head, and I still can't make sense of it. The fear hasn't gone away. It's just settled into a low hum in the back of my mind. Every time I look out at those woods, I wonder if it's still there, watching. And that's the part that keeps me up at night. Story 9. All right, I'll just get right into it. I've been turning this over in my head for months now, and I still can't make sense of it. I need to get it out somewhere. People might actually believe me, or at least understand why I can't just forget about it. It happened last fall in one of those secluded forest areas in Florida that doesn't even have a name on the map. Just a patch of thick, wet woods tucked between a swamp and some old logging roads. My neighbor, a guy I've known for years and trust with a gun, had gotten permission to hunt a piece of private land out there. He's the one who invited me. Said it was prime spot for deer, real quiet, no pressure from other hunters. We'd been planning this trip for a couple of weeks. The day started normal. I mean, completely, utterly normal. We got to the property before the sun was even up, the air already thick and humid, the kind that sticks to your skin. We parked the truck at the end of a dirt track and hauled our gear about a mile into a pre-built blind he knew about. It was a simple setup, just a box made of camo netting and some old branches, tucked right into a thicket. But it had a perfect view of a small clearing and a dried-up creek bed that cut through the woods like a scar. It looked like a deer highway. We got settled in. The blind was a tight fit for 2 grown men and all our gear, but we made it work. I remember the smell most of all, damp earth, rotting leaves, and the faint, oily scent of gun cleaner. We sat there not talking much, just listening to the woods wake up. At first, it was what you'd expect. Birds chirping, squirrels chattering and scrambling through the leaves, the buzz of insects. It was peaceful. We sat like that for over 2 hours, just watching the light change through the trees, scanning the clearing for any movement. My legs were starting to cramp and I was thinking about shifting my weight when it happened. The woods went silent. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was like someone flipped a switch. 1 second it was the normal busy sound of a forest in the morning. The next, nothing. Absolute, dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels, no insects. It was so sudden it felt like a physical pressure change. My ears were ringing in the silence. I looked over at my neighbor and he was already looking back at me, his eyes wide. He held a finger up to his lips, even though neither of us had been making a sound. We were both on edge, instantly. Your gut knows when something's wrong, even before your brain figures it out. And my gut was screaming. We just sat there, frozen, straining to hear anything. The silence was heavier than any noise. It felt wrong. It felt watched. Then the crashing started. It was about 300 yards away, deep in the tree line on the other side of the creek bed. Heavy, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch sounds. Something big was moving, and moving with purpose. It wasn't running. It was just walking. But each step sounded like it was snapping branches underfoot. My first thought was, that's a big damn bear. But Florida black bears don't sound that heavy, and they don't walk like that. My neighbor has this piece of gear, a Walker game ear. It's like a hearing aid for hunters, amplifies sounds. He slowly raised his hand to his ear, his face a mask of concentration. I watched him, not breathing. His eyes got even wider, and he slowly turned his head back to me. He mouthed 2 words, his face pale. 2 legs. My blood went cold. 2 legs, a steady bipedal gait. Not a bear on its hind legs. They're clumsy. They don't walk far like that. This was a steady, confident 2-legged walk. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Like a man. But no man I've ever known could make that much noise walking through thick woods unless he was wearing lead boots and just plowing through the brush. We both raised our rifles, not aiming at anything yet, just peering through our scopes, trying to find the source of the sound. The thermal scope on my neighbor's rifle showed nothing, just the cool blues and greens of the trees. My own scope showed an empty, tangled wall of green and brown, but we could still hear it. It was getting closer. 250 yards, 200. The sound was so loud, so out of place, it was making my heart hammer against my ribs. I could feel the vibration of each step through the ground, a faint thump I felt more than heard. Then it stopped. The silence came back, even more oppressive than before. We stayed frozen, scopes glued to our eyes, scanning every shadow, every gap in the trees. Nothing moved. For a full minute, maybe 2, there was nothing, just that awful, waiting silence. I remember thinking, it knows we're here. It stopped because it knows. That's when the boom happened. It wasn't a gunshot, it wasn't a tree falling, it was a deep percussive boom that came from right in front of us, maybe 50 yards out, just on the edge of the clearing. It was so loud, it physically shook the blind. The camo netting fluttered. I felt it in my teeth. My neighbor flinched so hard he almost dropped his rifle. We both ducked down instinctively, and then the howl. It erupted out of the silence right after the boom, a sound I can't even properly describe. It was deep, guttural, and unbelievably loud. It wasn't high-pitched like a coyote or a wolf. It was a low, roaring howl that seemed to start in the ground and rip up through the air. It resonated in my chest, a horrible vibration that made my insides feel like jelly. It was full of rage and power and something else, something intelligent and hateful. It wasn't an animal calling to its kind. It was a challenge, a threat. It lasted for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, but it felt like an hour. When it stopped, the echo seemed to hang in the air for another few seconds, and then the silence rushed back in, somehow even thicker and more menacing than before. I think I stopped breathing. I know my hands were shaking so bad, I had to lower my rifle and grip my knees to steady them. My neighbor was just staring straight ahead, his face completely white. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. The sheer, primal terror we both felt was a language of its own. We were prey. We had never felt more like prey in our entire lives. We stayed in that blind, barely moving, for what felt like an eternity. The sun climbed higher, and the normal forest sounds never returned. It was just us, the silence, and the knowledge that something was out there, something that could make a sound like that and shake the ground. We scanned with our scopes and the thermal until our eyes ached. We saw nothing. No movement, no heat signature, no shape, no shadow. It was like whatever it was had just vanished after screaming its presence to the world. We waited until the sun started to dip below the trees, painting the sky in oranges and purples. We couldn't stay there after dark. The thought was unthinkable. As soon as the light began to fade, we made a silent agreement with a look. We had to move. We had to get back to the boat. Packing up our gear was the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever done. Every rustle of a gear bag, every click of a buckle sounded like a cannon shot in the silence. We moved as slowly and quietly as we could, but I was sure whatever was out there could hear every single sound we made. My skin was crawling, my back felt exposed and vulnerable. I kept expecting to feel a hot breath on my neck or hear that crashing start up again right behind us. Finally, we were packed. We slipped out of the blind and started the walk back. The path was a narrow dirt road, barely wide enough for an ATV, hemmed in on both sides by dense, dark woods. We walked quickly, not running, but with a purpose, our rifles held at a low ready, our heads on a swivel. We didn't speak. The only sounds were our own frantic footsteps and the ragged sound of our breathing. We'd gone about 200 yards down that road. I was in front, my neighbor right behind me. The woods were getting darker by the second, the details blurring into shadows, and that's when I got the feeling. It's a feeling I think every human has deep down, a primal alarm bell, the feeling that you are not alone, the feeling of being watched. It was so strong, it was like a physical touch on the back of my skull. My scalp tightened, every hair on my arms and neck stood straight up. I stopped dead in my tracks. My neighbor almost bumped into me. "What?" he whispered, his voice tight with fear. I didn't answer. I just slowly, so slowly, turned my head to look behind us, and I saw them, about 50 yards back, right at the edge of the tree line, about 7 feet off the ground. 2 eyes. They weren't reflecting light like a deer's eyes do. They were glowing, a dull amber-orange color like hot coals. They were just hovering there in the deepening gloom, perfectly still, fixed right on us. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't even make out a shape, a body, anything. Just those 2 glowing points of light in the darkness. They were too far apart to be any animal I knew, and way too high off the ground. Time seemed to stop. I just stood there, locked in place, staring at those eyes. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched. Then, in an instant, they were gone. Not faded, not turned away. They vanished. And as they did, The silence was shattered by the sound of heavy, incredibly fast footsteps crashing away into the woods. Thump, 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 thump. It was moving so fast, the sound of its footfalls was almost a continuous rumble. It wasn't running from us in fear. It was moving with a power and speed that felt aggressive, like it was just showing us what it could do before it left. In 2, maybe 3 seconds, the sound was gone, swallowed by the forest. We didn't wait. We didn't say a word. We just ran. We ran like our lives depended on it, stumbling down that dark path, branches whipping at our faces, not caring about the noise anymore. All that mattered was putting distance between us and that thing. We got to the boat, a little John boat we'd left tied up at a muddy bank. Our hands were shaking so bad we could barely untie the knot. We piled in, started the small outboard motor, and didn't say a single word until we were a half-mile down the river, the lights of the truck landing finally coming into view. We pulled the boat up onto the trailer, our movements frantic and uncoordinated. It was only when we were both inside the truck, with the doors locked and the engine running, that we finally looked at each other. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. He just shook his head, his hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. "I don't know, man, I don't know. Big, two-legged, and way too damn close." We drove home in near silence. We tried to rationalize it for a few minutes. A bear? No, a person, absolutely not. Nothing made sense. I still hunt. It's in my blood. But I've never gone back to that spot. I never will. My neighbor sold his hunting lease a week later. We don't really talk about it anymore. What is there to say? But I still see them when I close my eyes sometimes, especially on quiet, dark nights, those two glowing amber eyes hanging in the darkness watching. And I remember the silence and the boom and that howl that felt like it reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw and what I heard. And I know that something is out there in those Florida woods, something big, something that walks on 2 legs, and something that knows exactly how terrifying it is. Aitzal, Story 10. The first thing I really remember wasn't something I saw, but something my cousin screamed about. I must have been about 6 or 7. We were playing near the edge of the woods where my grandpa kept these rabbit cages. He bred them, not for pets, but for food and to sell. My cousin, who was a year older than me, just started shrieking. I mean, a full-on, blood-curdling scream that brought my grandma running from the house. He was pointing into the woods, crying, snot running down his face, saying over and over that he saw a hairy monster eating a rabbit. We all thought he was just letting his imagination run wild, you know how kids are. But then we saw the cage. It was one of the heavy-duty wire ones, and it was just smashed, flattened. The door was ripped clean off its hinges, and inside it was a mess. The rabbit was just torn apart, not eaten neatly. It was like something had just grabbed it and ripped it to pieces in a fury. The strength that would have taken, it wasn't a fox or a coyote. They're clever, they'll find a way in, but they don't obliterate a heavy wire cage. That was the start of it. After that, it became a regular thing. We'd go out in the morning and find another cage destroyed, another rabbit gone or mangled. My grandpa started reinforcing them with extra locks and thicker wire, but it didn't matter. Whatever it was would just tear through it like it was paper. The weirdest part was, we never found tracks around the cages. The ground was always too hard or too covered in leaves. It was like a ghost was doing it. The nights were the worst. You'd be lying in bed in the back bedroom, the one with the window that faced the woods, and you'd hear things. Not just the normal rustling of raccoons or possums. These were footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps, something big walking through the dry leaves. You'd hear it stop, and then there'd be this silence that was heavier than the noise. You'd just lie there, your heart hammering against your ribs, praying it would move on. Sometimes you'd hear what sounded like something big moving through the underbrush, snapping branches that should have been too thick to snap so easily. My grandparents never talked about it much, but you could see it in their eyes. They were uneasy. They'd make sure we were all inside before the sun went down, and the back door was always locked, something I never really understood until I was older. Then one morning, I remember it was a Saturday, my grandma called us all out to the garden. The garden was her pride and joy, a huge plot of vegetables right at the tree line. She was standing there, her hand over her mouth, just staring at the ground. There, pressed deep into the soft, wet soil next to her prized tomatoes, was a single footprint. But it wasn't a human footprint. It was enormous. I remember my grandpa coming out, his face going grim. He knelt down and just looked at it. He didn't say anything for a long time. The print was long, really long, and wide. You could see the outlines of toes. It looked almost human, but not quite. The arch was in the wrong place, and the whole thing was just massive. Later that day, my grandpa pulled me aside. He was a man of few words, a quiet, sturdy farmer who'd seen a lot in his life. He put his hand on my shoulder and looked me right in the eye. He said, "You listen to me. You see anything out there, anything at all that don't look right, you get back to the house, fast. You don't stop, you don't look back, and whatever you do, you don't anger it. You understand?" I nodded, my throat tight. I'd never seen him look so serious, so scared. That's what chilled me the most. He wasn't just warning me about a bear or a mean dog. He was warning me about an it. But all of that was just the background noise. The creeping dread that was always there, the real terror, the moment that is burned into my brain forever, happened on one specific day. I think I was 10, maybe 12. It's hard to be sure. The memory is so intense, it feels like it exists outside of time. It was late afternoon, starting to get that long golden light that means evening is coming on. My grandma had given me a bowl of kitchen scraps to take out to the dogs. We had 2 big mutts that lived in a kennel run about 50 yards from the house, right on the edge of the woods. I remember trudging across the yard, the bowl in my hands, not thinking about anything in particular. The air was cool, and I could smell the damp earth from the garden. I was almost to the kennel when I heard it. A sound, not a loud one. It was a low, guttural breath, like a horse sighing, but deeper, wetter. It came from my left, from the thick line of trees and brush that separated the yard from the deep woods. I stopped dead. My whole body went cold. I turned my head slowly, and that's when I saw it. It was standing just inside the tree line, half hidden by a big oak tree. It was tall, so unbelievably tall. I'm not good with estimating heights, but I remember looking up at it. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't fur like a bear. It was long, shaggy and matted, a dark brownish-red color, like old rust. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick, corded with muscle. But its face is what I can't forget. It wasn't a monkey face, and it wasn't a bear face. It was something in between. The brow was heavy, casting its eyes in shadow, but I could see them. They were glowing. I'm not saying this to be dramatic. They were literally glowing with a faint red light, like 2 hot coals in the gloom under the trees. And the smell. Oh God, the smell hit me then. It was this overwhelming, sour, rotten smell, like spoiled meat and wet dog and something else, something metallic and old. It made my stomach turn. We just stared at each other. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. It was like every cell in my body had just shut down, except for the one screaming in pure, undiluted terror. My mind was completely blank. There was no thought, no plan, just this primal, animal fear. Then it moved. It didn't rush at me. It didn't roar. It was eerily silent. It just bent forward at the waist. It leaned down, its huge torso tilting towards me, and its face came out of the shadows. Those red eyes locked onto mine. I could see its mouth, a dark line, and I could hear that low, wet breathing again, louder now. It was studying me. I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. I was completely and utterly helpless. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It could have been 2 seconds or 2 minutes. Time had lost all meaning. The only thing in the entire world was me and this thing and its horrible glowing eyes. Then, from the direction of the house, I heard a sharp, sudden gasp. It was my grandmother. She was standing on the back porch, one hand clutching the railing, the other over her heart. She must have come out to see what was taking me so long. The creature's head snapped towards the sound. It was incredibly fast. Then it looked back at me, just for a split second. There was no anger in its eyes, no malice. It was just a look, an acknowledgement. And then it straightened up, turned, and simply melted back into the woods. It didn't crash through the brush. It didn't make a sound. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible shape, and the next, the space under the oak tree was empty. The only evidence it had ever been there was the lingering rotten smell and the absolute soul-crushing terror coursing through my veins. I still couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, the bowl of scraps shaking violently in my hands. My grandma rushed over to me, her face pale as a sheet. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me towards the house. She didn't say a word until we were inside. The back door slammed shut and locked behind us. That was the day everything changed. After that, the rules became absolute law. No one went outside after dark. No exceptions. The dogs were brought into the barn at night. We didn't play near the woods anymore. The property, which had felt so big and free, suddenly felt small and surrounded. The woods weren't just woods anymore. They were a wall, and something was on the other side watching us, and it never really went away. Over the years, we'd be reminded. You'd be sitting on the porch in the evening and you'd catch a whiff of that sour, rotten smell on the breeze, just for a second, before it was gone. Sometimes, late at night, you'd hear a deep, guttural grunt echo from deep within the ravines. A sound that was too big, too primal, to be any animal I knew. I've seen it twice more since that day, both times from a distance, just a dark, massive shape moving between the trees. Always silent. Always watching. My grandparents are gone now and the property belongs to someone else, but I still think about it. I'm convinced, deep in my bones, that it's still out there, roaming those same ravines and timber of Illinois. I don't know what it was. I don't have a name for it. I just know what I saw, what I smelled, what I felt. And I know that on that one afternoon when I was just a kid taking scraps to the dogs, I came face to face with something that should not exist, and it looked right back at me. Story 11. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while now, mostly because every time I try to talk about it, my hands start shaking, and I feel like I'm right back there. But I need to get this out, and this seems like the place where people might actually believe me. My name's Jason Lewis, and this happened to me and my friend Mark Harper back in August of 2019. We were out near Condon, Oregon, picking wild blackberries. It was supposed to be a simple, quiet afternoon, the kind of thing we'd done a dozen times before, but it turned into the most terrifying day of my life, and I still can't wrap my head around what we saw. That morning, Mark and I had driven out in his old Ford pickup truck. It was one of those bright, warm days where the sun felt good on your skin, but not too hot. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and you could hear birds chirping off in the distance. We'd packed some sandwiches and water, nothing fancy, just aiming to fill a couple buckets with berries for jam and maybe a pie. Mark's mom loves that stuff, and I don't mind it either. We parked the truck on a gravel pull-off near a dirt road that led into the woods. The blackberry thickets were sprawling all over the place, tangled and thorny, but loaded with ripe fruit. We'd been coming to this spot for years, ever since we were teenagers, and it always felt safe, familiar. We got out of the truck around midday. I'd say maybe 1 or 2 in the afternoon. The sun was high, casting dappled shadows through the trees. Mark grabbed the buckets from the bed of the truck, and we started picking. We weren't far from each other, maybe 20, 30 feet apart, but the bushes were thick, so we couldn't always see each other clearly. I remember the feel of the thorns scratching my arms as I reached for the berries, the juice staining my fingers purple. It was peaceful, quiet. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves, the occasional buzz of insects, and us chatting back and forth about nothing important. Work, sports, whatever. I was focused on a particularly dense patch, my bucket about half full, when I first noticed something off. It was a sound, but not one I could place right away, like a heavy rustling uphill beyond where we were. At first, I thought it might be a deer or maybe a bear. We've got black bears around here, but they usually keep their distance. I paused and looked up, squinting into the trees. The movement was slow, deliberate, like something big was pacing back and forth. I could hear branches snapping under its weight, a low, grinding noise that made the hair on my arm stand up. I called out to Mark, keeping my voice low. "Hey, you hear that?" He stopped picking and listened. For a second, everything went still. Then it came again, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate right through the ground. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard, not a bear's growl, which is more guttural, or a cougar's, which is higher pitched. This was lower, almost like a roll of thunder, but closer, more menacing. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I could feel this cold sweat break out on my forehead. Mark took a step toward me, his eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. We both stood there, frozen, staring uphill. The trees were thick, but through the gaps I saw it, a dark shape moving between the trunks. It was huge, way bigger than any man or bear I'd ever seen. Then it stepped out into a clearer spot, and I got a full view. This thing was easily over 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that looked matted and shaggy. It stood upright but hunched, with massive shoulders and arms that hung down almost to its knees. Its head was broad, with a heavy brow ridge that shadowed its eyes, so I couldn't see them clearly. But I felt like it was staring right at us. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. It was like my feet were glued to the ground. The creature took a few steps, and each one was heavy, making the earth shake slightly. It was pacing back and forth like it was sizing us up. Then it stopped and let out another growl, this one louder, more aggressive. That's when I knew we were in trouble. This wasn't just some curious animal. It felt intentional, like it knew we were there and didn't like it. Mark was the first to snap out of it. "Jason, we need to go, now!" His voice was tight with fear. I dropped my bucket, the berries scattering everywhere, and we both turned to run. The slope was steep and covered in loose dirt and leaves, so we were slipping and stumbling right away. I could hear the creature behind us. Its footsteps were thunderous, crashing through the undergrowth like it was tearing everything apart. It was charging downhill, and I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots. Every few steps, I'd glance back, and each time it was closer, moving in these long, ground-swallowing strides that ate up the distance way faster than any human could run. I remember the sound of its breathing, ragged, heavy pants that echoed in the air. Its arms were pumping as it ran, and its head was tucked down like a football player in a tackle. The speed was unbelievable. I've seen bears run and they're fast, but this was something else. It was smooth, powerful, like it was built for this terrain. The smell hit me too, a musky, earthy odor, like wet dog and decay that made my stomach churn. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly. I could hear Mark panting beside me, his face pale with terror. We were maybe 50 yards from the truck, but it felt like miles. The creature was gaining on us, and I could see its shadow stretching out ahead, dark and looming. Then Mark tripped. He went down hard, skidding on the gravel and letting out a sharp cry. I didn't even think. I just reached back and grabbed his arm, hauling him up. His shirt was torn and there was blood on his elbow, but he scrambled to his feet and we kept running. The truck was right there, maybe 20 feet away. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip them. The creature was so close now, I could hear the individual thuds of its feet hitting the ground, each one like a hammer blow. I risked one more look back and saw it clearly, its eyes deep-set and dark, fixed on us with an intensity that made my blood run cold. It wasn't roaring or making a lot of noise. It was silent, except for those footsteps and its breathing, which made it even scarier, like it was focused, determined. We reached the truck, and I yanked the door open, practically throwing myself inside. Mark scrambled in on the passenger side, and I slammed the door shut just as the creature emerged onto the road behind us. It didn't stop. It kept coming, but we were in the truck now. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. My hands were slippery with sweat on the steering wheel, and I threw it into drive, stomping on the gas. The tires spun on the gravel, kicking up dust, and we shot forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw it standing there, heaving, its chest rising and falling rapidly. It didn't chase us further, it just watched us go. And then it let out this sound. Not a roar, but something raw and guttural that seemed to shake the air around us. I couldn't hear it over the engine, but I felt it, like a pressure in my ears. We sped down the dirt road, not slowing until we were back on the main highway, miles away. The whole drive back, neither of us spoke. I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see it following us, but there was nothing. My heart was still racing, and my body was trembling uncontrollably. Mark was clutching the dashboard, his knuckles white. We didn't say a word until we got to my place, and even then, it was just fragmented sentences. "Did you see that?" What was that? Over and over, like if we said it enough times, it might make sense, but it never did. We went back the next day with some rangers, but that's a whole other thing. And honestly, I don't want to get into it right now. What happened that day, in those few minutes, is what sticks with me. The sheer power of that thing, the way it moved, the silence before it charged. It's burned into my brain. I haven't been back to those woods since, and I don't think I ever will. Every time I close my eyes, I see it standing there, and I feel that same gut-wrenching fear. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't any animal I've ever heard of, and I can't explain it, not to myself, not to anyone. It just happened, and now it's a part of me, this heavy, scary memory that I carry around every day. Story 12. It was one of those late October mornings in Ohio where the air feels like it's holding its breath. You know the kind, the chill isn't brutal yet, but it's got teeth, and the sun is just a weak suggestion through a ceiling of grey clouds. I was up before dawn, the way I always am for the first day of deer season. The ritual of it is as familiar as my own hands, pulling on the layers, the scent of coffee and gun oil in the kitchen, the quiet drive out to the old family property. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. I know every dip and hill, every cluster of oaks, every rotting log where I've kicked up turkeys in the past. It's more home than my actual house is. That morning felt normal, perfect even. The woods were so still, you could hear a single leaf let go and spiral down. I'd parked my truck at the gate and hiked about 1.5 miles into my favorite spot, a natural blind on a ridge overlooking a creek bottom. I'd been settled in for maybe 2 hours, watching the light slowly change from black to grey to a dull, filtered white. I hadn't seen a thing, not even a squirrel, which was a little odd, but not unheard of. Sometimes the woods are just quiet. Around 9 in the morning, I got a cramp in my leg from sitting still for so long. I figured I'd stretch my legs, maybe do a slow, quiet loop down into the bottom and back up. I wasn't really hunting anymore, just walking, letting my mind wander to bills and work and all the mundane stuff you think about when you're alone. My rifle was slung over my shoulder, more out of habit than any expectation. The trail I was on is an old deer run, narrow and winding, carpeted in a thick layer of last year's leaves. It cuts through a thicket of young beech trees, their smooth gray bark like skin in the dim light. I was maybe 100 yards from the creek when I saw it. At first my brain just refused to process it. It was like a glitch. Up ahead, the trail bent slightly, and there was this shape. It was massive, way too tall to be a bear, and it was standing on two legs. It had its back to me, and it was reaching up, its head tilted back, looking up into the branches of a big old hickory tree. My first stupid thought was, is that a guy in a really weird, shaggy coat? But in the next half second, that thought evaporated. This wasn't a person. The proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were impossibly broad, sloping down to long, thick arms that hung past its knees. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't fur like a bear. It was more like a thick, matted coat, a dark, brownish-grey color like wet bark. I froze. My feet just stopped moving. It was a full-body freeze, the kind you read about but don't understand until it happens to you. Every muscle locked up. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I thought I was going to choke on it. My heart wasn't just pounding, it felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of my ribcage. I could feel the individual thuds in my neck, in my temples. The creature was huge. 8 feet tall was no exaggeration. It was solid, not lanky. It looked heavy, powerful, and it was so quiet. It wasn't making a sound, just studying whatever was up in that hickory tree with an intensity that felt intelligent. It wasn't just an animal looking for food, it was observing. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe 5 seconds, maybe 20. Time got weird. Then, as if it had felt the weight of my stare, it slowly turned its head. That was the moment the world shrank down to just the two of us. Its face wasn't ape-like, not really. It was flatter, with a heavy brow ridge, but beneath that were these big, deep-set brown eyes. They weren't the black, dead eyes of a deer. They were aware. They were looking right at me, and I saw a flicker of something in them. Not aggression, not at first, but a kind of startled curiosity. It was like we had both caught each other off guard. Its whole body turned now, and it dropped its arms to its sides. We were maybe 40 feet apart. I could see its chest moving as it breathed, the steam from its breath puffing out in little clouds in the cold air. The smell hit me then. I'd heard stories about the smell, but you can't imagine it. It was a mix of things. Wet dog, sure, but also a deep, musky scent like old soil and rotting leaves. And underneath it all, a sharp, foul odor like something had died. It was so strong it made my eyes water. It took a step toward me. My brain screamed at me to run, to raise my gun, to do something. But my body was still locked in that primal freeze. Running felt like the worst possible idea. It would trigger a chase, and there was no way I could outrun that thing. It looked like it could cover the ground between us in 2 strides. Raising my gun felt even more dangerous. I wasn't dealing with a dumb animal. The way it was looking at me, it was assessing me. It knew what the gun was. I felt that in my gut. Pointing a weapon at it felt like signing my own death warrant. So I did the only thing that made any sense in that insane moment. My hands, trembling so hard I was afraid I'd drop the rifle, moved on their own. I slowly, so slowly, it felt like moving through syrup, unslung my Remington 700 from my shoulder. I didn't break eye contact. I held its gaze, those big brown eyes just watching me, unblinking. I lowered the gun, gripping it by the barrel and the stock, and I held it down at my side, pointing at the ground. A gesture, a stupid, desperate, hopeful gesture. I mean no harm. It stopped. It was about 20 feet away now. I could see every detail. The way the hair was matted and clumped on its chest, the sheer power in its thighs, the hands, they were huge, with long, thick fingers, not claws, but fingers, curled slightly. It tilted its head again, just a little, and its eyes narrowed. It was studying me. It was thinking. I could feel it thinking. The air was so thick with tension you could have cut it with a knife. The only sound was the blood roaring in my ears and my own ragged, terrified breathing. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how I die. In the woods I've loved my whole life, killed by something that isn't supposed to exist. I thought about my wife, my kids. I wondered if anyone would ever find my body. Then it opened its mouth. It wasn't a roar. It was a sound I have no words for. It started as a low, guttural growl that vibrated in my own chest, and then it rose into this piercing, screeching howl that tore through the silent woods. It was deafening. It was a sound of pure, raw power, and it was full of, I don't know, warning, anger. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world. It felt ancient. My knees literally went weak. If I hadn't been frozen in place, I would have collapsed. The sound echoed through the trees, and then everything went dead silent again. The birds, the insects, everything had already been quiet. But now the silence felt deeper, heavier, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. The creature took one more step. It was now close enough that I could have thrown a rock and hit it. The smell was overwhelming. I could see the texture of its skin around its eyes and mouth, dark and leathery. I was staring right into its eyes, and I saw something shift. The curiosity was still there, but the tension seemed to ease. It looked from my face down to the gun I was holding harmlessly at my side, and then back to my face. And then it just turned. It didn't walk away. It spun on the balls of its feet with an agility that was terrifying for something so massive, and it ran. It didn't crash through the underbrush like a bear or a deer. It moved with a fluid, powerful grace, weaving between the trees. It was unbelievably fast. In 2, maybe 3 seconds, it had vanished into the thick timber, swallowed by the shadows. The sound of its movement was just a soft, receding rustle, and then nothing. I didn't move. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my gun still held uselessly at my side, my body trembling from head to toe. The adrenaline dump hit me like a truck. My vision swam, and I had to lean over, putting my hands on my knees, convinced I was going to be sick. I was gasping for air, my heart still trying to beat its way out of my chest. The smell lingered, that awful pungent mix of musk and decay. When I could finally make my legs work, I didn't run. I backed away, slowly at first, then faster, my eyes glued to the spot where it had disappeared. I kept backing up until I bumped into a tree, and the shock of it made me yelp. I fumbled my rifle, slinging it back over my shoulder with clumsy, shaking hands, and then I turned, and I walked. I didn't run, because running felt like an invitation for it to come back. I just walked as fast as I could without breaking into a sprint, my head on a swivel, checking every shadow, every tree. The hike back to the truck, which usually took 20 minutes, felt like it took 2 hours. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I got to my truck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the door. I threw my rifle in the passenger seat, got in, and locked the doors. I just sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, staring out at the tree line, half expecting to see it step out and look at me with those big brown eyes. I never went back to that part of the property. I still hunt, but I stick to the fields on the other side. I told my wife I saw a big bear that spooked me. She believed me. What else was I going to say? I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times. The way it looked at me, the way it seemed to understand my gesture with the gun, that sound, that god-awful sound. I wasn't hallucinating, I wasn't sleeping. I was there, in the cold Ohio woods, and I saw something that shouldn't be. I looked it right in the eye, and sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I can still smell it. Story 13. It was one of those thick, heavy summer days where the air feels like a warm blanket you can't take off. This was almost 10 years ago now. I was living alone in a little house my granddad left me, way out in the rural part of Mena, Arkansas. The property backed right up against the Ouachita National Forest, just this endless wall of green trees and shadows. I loved it mostly, the quiet. But that day, the quiet got broken. I was out in my vegetable garden, probably around 10 in the morning. The sun was already beating down, and I was sweating through my old t-shirt, my hands all dirty from trying to coax my tomatoes to life. I remember the smell of the earth, that rich, damp smell, and the buzzing of flies around the compost pile. Everything was normal. Just another Tuesday. And then I heard it. At first, I thought it was a tractor or something, a neighbor working their land. But it was wrong. It wasn't a clean engine sound. It was lower, wetter. It sounded like gargling, like if you tried to gargle water and run a lawnmower at the same time. A deep, guttural, chugging noise. It was coming from the woods just beyond the old property line, past where my garden ended and the wild started. It was so strange, so completely out of place, that I just stopped what I was doing. I stood up, my back aching a little, and I listened. The sound would go for a few seconds, stop, and then start up again. It wasn't loud, but it carried. It made the hair on my arms stand up, and not from the heat. It was a wrong sound, a sound that didn't belong in my peaceful morning. Curiosity is a hell of a thing. It overrides the little voice in your head that tells you to go back inside and lock the door. I wiped my hands on my jeans and started walking towards the noise. I wasn't being brave. I think I was just so convinced there had to be a logical explanation. A broken piece of farm equipment. A weird animal in distress. Something. I pushed through the overgrown raspberry bushes at the edge of my property. There's an old gazebo back there, or what's left of one. It was all rotten wood and peeling white paint, covered in ivy. My granddad built it for my grandma, but it had been falling apart for years. The sound was coming from right behind it. My heart was starting to thump a little harder in my chest. The gargling motor sound was clearer now, more distinct. I remember the feeling of the cool shade from the big oak trees hitting my skin after being in the sun, and the way the smell changed from garden soil to the deep, musky scent of the forest floor. I peeked around the corner of the gazebo, and I saw it. My brain, in that first split second, tried to make it make sense. It tried to tell me it was a dirty little boy, a kid from one of the farms down the road, covered in mud and leaves, crouched over something. He had this matted, dark, brownish-red hair all over his body, like a dog with a really bad case of mange. It was small, maybe the size of a 6-year-old child, but built solid, thick. It was crouched down, its back to me, and it was working on something. That's when the smell hit me. It was a smell I knew from finding roadkill in the summer, that thick, coppery, sweet, rotten smell of death. And then I saw what it was hunched over. It was a baby deer, a fawn. Its side was torn open, and this thing was chewing on it. Its head was dipped down, and I could hear wet, tearing sounds mixed in with that low, gargling growl. I must have made a noise, a gasp, or my foot crunched a twig, because it stopped. Its head snapped up, and it turned to look right at me. It wasn't a boy. It wasn't any animal I had ever seen. Its face was ape-like, but flatter. The eyes were a deep, intelligent brown, set under a heavy brow. They weren't animal eyes. There was a person in there, a mean, pissed-off person. Its mouth was open, and I saw these small, sharp-looking teeth stained dark with blood. Bits of fur and flesh were stuck around its lips. We just stared at each other for what felt like an hour. I was frozen. My whole body went cold, like I'd been dunked in ice water. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, looking at this thing that wasn't supposed to exist, looking back at me from over the corpse of a deer. Then it opened its mouth wider and it screeched. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a scream. It was this high-pitched, tearing sound that felt like it was drilling right into my skull. It was full of hate and warning. The sound was so loud and so sharp it broke the spell that was holding me frozen. The thing didn't stand up. It dropped onto all fours and scrambled away into the trees. It moved so fast, a blur of matted hair and limbs, crashing through the undergrowth. The sound of its movement faded quickly, and then it was gone. I stood there, shaking. My legs felt like jelly. I could still smell the dead deer. I could still hear that screech echoing in my ears. My mind was just a frantic, staticky mess. What was that? What the hell was that? I kept asking myself over and over. A bear? No. A chimp? Out here? No, it was impossible. Every logical explanation my brain tried to offer up just fell apart. I forced myself to look at the fawn. It was a mess. Its ribs were showing, white and red in the gloom. Flies were already starting to gather again. The sight of it and the smell made my stomach lurch. I stumbled back a few steps, my hand over my mouth. I needed to get out of there. I needed to get back to my house, to the phone, to something normal. That's when I felt it. It's hard to describe. But you know when someone is watching you? You get this prickle on the back of your neck, this feeling of pressure. The woods had gone dead silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. The silence was heavier and more frightening than the gargling noise had been. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I looked past the gazebo, deeper into the trees, to where the shadows were thickest, and I saw it. Another one. This one was bigger. Much, much bigger. It was standing behind a massive pine tree, using the trunk to hide most of its body. But I could see its shoulder, covered in the same kind of dark, shaggy hair. But this hair was longer, cleaner looking, and I could see its face. It was peering out from behind the tree, one dark eye fixed right on me. This wasn't the small, mangy thing. This was an adult. Its face was broader, more weathered. The intelligence in that one visible eye was staggering. It wasn't the wild, panicked look of the little one. This was a calm, calculating observation. It was studying me, our eyes locked. In that moment, every ounce of fear I had multiplied by 1,000. This was the source of the dread I'd felt. This was what had been watching me, a cold terror, the kind I didn't know a person could feel and still be standing, washed over me. It was a primal fear, something deep in my DNA screaming that I was prey, that I was looking at something that could tear me apart without a second thought. But the weirdest thing happened in that frozen second. As I looked into its eye, I didn't see aggression. I didn't see the rage that the little one had. I saw recognition. It's the only word I have for it. It felt like it knew me, like it had seen me before, walking my property, tending my garden, living my life. It had been watching, and it had decided I wasn't a threat. I was just part of the landscape. That thought was somehow more chilling than if it had charged me. The idea that this gigantic, impossible creature had been observing my life, learning my routines, and had judged me as harmless. It knew I meant no harm, but the sheer power in its gaze, the sheer otherness of it, filled me with a dread so complete I thought I might just pass out. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, half hidden, watching me with that deep, knowing eye. I could see the texture of its hair, the way it lay in thick cords. I could see the leathery, dark skin around its eye. I could smell it now, too. A powerful, wild smell, like a wet dog mixed with old leaves and something else, something musky and alien. I don't know how long we stood like that. It could have been 3 seconds, it could have been a minute. Time just stopped. My brain had given up trying to understand and had just switched to pure animal survival. Don't move, don't provoke it. And then, slowly, without breaking eye contact, it pulled its head back behind the tree. It didn't retreat. It didn't run. It just withdrew. One moment its eye was there, and the next, it was just the tree trunk and the deep shadows of the forest. I didn't wait. I didn't look for it. I turned and I ran. I ran like I've never run before or since. I didn't feel the branches whipping at my arms and face. I didn't feel the burn in my lungs. I just ran. A blind, panicked sprint back through the raspberry bushes, across my garden, not even caring that I was trampling my vegetables. I slammed into my back door, fumbled with the knob, fell inside, and scrambled to lock it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. I spent the rest of that day sitting on my kitchen floor, my back against the door, listening. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I was covered in dirt and sweat and scratches, and I couldn't stop shaking. I kept seeing that face, the little one, bloody and furious. The big one, calm and all-knowing. I thought about calling someone, the police, and say, "What? Hello, I saw a Bigfoot in my backyard." they'd think I was crazy. My friends, they'd laugh, or worse, get genuinely worried about my mental state. I had no proof, just a dead deer and a story that sounded insane, so I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, trapped in my own house by the memory of those eyes. I lived in that house for another 6 years. I never saw either of them again, not a glimpse. But I heard things. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear that same low, gargling sound, way off in the distance, carried on the wind from deep within the Wachita. Sometimes I'd hear rocks being knocked together, a rhythmic clacking that had no reason to be there. Once, I found a huge, 5-toed footprint pressed deep into the mud by my creek after a heavy rain. It was bigger than my head. I eventually moved away, got a job in a city, where the only noises are traffic and people, but I've never forgotten. I don't talk about it much because what's the point? People either believe you or they think you're a liar or a lunatic. But I know what I saw. I know the feel of that gaze, the intelligence in that one dark eye. I know the smell of its fur and the sound of its young. It wasn't a monster from a movie. It was an animal, a big, smart, secretive animal that wants to be left alone. That day in the garden, I stumbled into its world for just a few minutes, and it showed me just enough to make sure I'd never, ever forget. And I never have. They're out there, as real as the deer and the trees and the ground under my feet. I have no doubt about that, none at all. Story 14. We were driving back from a fishing trip up near the Pitt River. It was me, my buddy Mark, and his cousin, a guy named Leo. We'd been out for a couple of days, and we were tired, covered in dirt and mosquito bites, and just wanted to get home. The truck smelled like old sandwiches, wet dog, and us. It was that kind of tired where your eyes feel gritty, and the world seems a little fuzzy around the edges. It was late, real late. Must have been past 1 in the morning. The kind of late where you don't see other cars for 20, 30 minutes at a stretch. We were on this stretch of 299 that cuts through the Modoc National Forest. If you've never been out there, it's dark. I mean, properly dark. No streetlights, no houses, just this long, winding ribbon of asphalt with walls of pine trees and blackness on either side. Your headlights are the only thing that exists, pushing back the night just enough to show you the next curve. Mark was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and Leo was passed out in the back, snoring lightly. The radio was on, some classic rock station that was fading in and out, mostly static with a little guitar riff poking through now and then. We weren't talking much, just staring at the road, the yellow lines hypnotically flicking past. I remember shifting in my seat, trying to get comfortable. The vinyl was sticky from spilled soda. I had my arm resting on the open window frame, feeling the cool, pine-scented air wash over my face. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that's so deep it has a sound of its own, a low hum of nothing. Then it happened. It was so fast, but it also felt like it lasted forever. Our headlights swept around a gentle left-hand curve, and the beams hit something on the right-hand shoulder. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just a shape, a big, dark shape, right next to one of those reflective green speed limit signs. But then my eyes focused, and my entire body went cold. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man. It was something else. It was huge. I'm not talking big, I'm talking massive. It had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall, and built like a goddamn refrigerator. It must have weighed 500 pounds, easy. It was covered in this long, straggly hair, a kind of reddish-brown color, like rusted iron. The hair was matted and shaggy, and it seemed to move independently from the body as it walked. It was walking. That's the thing that still gets me. It was just walking parallel to the road, maybe 5 feet off the asphalt, and its walk. It wasn't right. Its legs were bent, knees permanently flexed, giving it this low, powerful, rolling gait. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, swinging slightly with each step. It didn't shuffle or amble like a bear. It moved with a purpose, a steady, ground-eating stride that was completely unnatural. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't make a sound. I just stared, my brain screaming at me that this was impossible. And then a car came from the opposite direction, a sedan, its headlights bright. It was going at a good speed, probably 65, 70. It was heading straight for the thing. I remember my heart just seizing up. I thought, it's going to hit it. Oh my God, it's going to hit it. The car got closer and closer. At the last possible second, it must have seen the thing because it swerved, just a tiny jerk of the wheel, and blew past it. The whoosh of air as it passed rocked our truck a little, and the creature, it didn't even flinch. It didn't turn its head. It didn't break its stride. It just kept walking. That was maybe the most terrifying part of the whole thing. A 2-ton piece of metal and glass almost clips it, and it acts like it's nothing. Like a car was just a minor inconvenience. A bug buzzing past. It showed no concern at all. It was just moving through its world, and we were just noise in it. We were past it in maybe 2-3 seconds. The whole encounter was that brief. But those seconds stretched into an eternity inside my head. As soon as we were past, I whipped my head around, staring out the back window. The red taillights of the other car were already disappearing around the next bend. The creature was just a dark, shrinking shape in the gloom behind us, still walking, swallowed by the night. "Mark," I finally choked out. My voice was a dry croak. He didn't say anything. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He was staring straight ahead, his face pale and rigid in the green glow of the dashboard lights. "What?" Leo mumbled from the back, stirred awake by the tension. "What's going on?" I couldn't form the words. I just kept looking back, even though there was nothing to see anymore, just blackness. "Did you see that?" Mark whispered. He sounded like he'd been punched in the gut. "See what?" Leo asked, now fully awake, leaning forward between the seats. I finally found my voice. There was something on the side of the road." "What, a deer?" "No," I said, and the word came out shaky. "No, it wasn't a deer." I described it. The size, the hair, the walk, the way it ignored the car. As I talked, I could feel my hands starting to tremble. I clasped them together to make it stop, but my whole body was humming with this weird, electric fear. It wasn't the sharp panic of almost getting in a crash. It was a deep, primal dread, a cold stone sitting in my gut. It was the feeling of having seen something that wasn't supposed to be real. Leo was silent for a minute. Then he said, "You're shitting me." "I wish I was," Mark said, his eyes still glued to the road. He was driving faster now, his foot heavier on the gas. The truck engine whined a little higher. We drove in silence for another 5 minutes, nobody saying a word. The static from the radio seemed louder, more menacing. The trees outside felt like they were pressing in. Every shadow at the edge of our headlights looked like it was about to move. I kept expecting to see that huge, shambling form step out in front of us. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A guy in a big coat? No. The proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the legs were too bent. A bear walking on its hind legs. I've seen that. Bears look clumsy, top-heavy. This thing was balanced, powerful. Its movement was fluid, not a clumsy waddle, and the sheer size was beyond any black bear I'd ever seen or heard of. Then Leo spoke up again, his voice quiet. "You know, my uncle hunts up around here. He told me a story once, said him and his buddy were camping off one of the fire roads a few years back and heard something massive moving through the trees around their camp all night. They said it sounded big. Left footprints the next morning that were way too big for a man. That's when the pieces started clicking into a horrifying picture. This wasn't just a one-off. This thing lived here. Mark must have been thinking the same thing. "Pull over," he said suddenly. "What?" "No way," I said, my voice rising. "Just for a second. I need..." I need to stop. My hands are shaking." He guided the truck onto a wide pullout, a gravel area probably used by loggers. He killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute and heavy. It was the loudest silence I've ever heard. No radio, no engine, just the three of us breathing and the faint tick-tick of the engine cooling down. We just sat there. Nobody got out. The idea of opening a door, of letting that outside air in, felt like a terrible risk. The cab of the truck felt like the only safe place in the world. I looked at Mark. He had his forehead resting on the steering wheel, taking deep, slow breaths. Leo was just staring out his window into the wall of trees, his expression unreadable. I was replaying the sight over and over in my head. The way the headlights had glinted off that reddish-brown hair, the sheer mass of its shoulders, the way its feet, whatever they looked like, must have been hitting the ground with each of those deliberate steps. I tried to picture its face, but I couldn't. It had been turned away from us, a dark profile. Maybe that was a blessing. The curiosity was starting to mix with the fear. What was it doing? Where was it going? Was it alone? The thought that there could be more of them right there in those woods, watching our truck with its interior light on. It made the skin on my arms prickle. "We should go," Leo said, his voice tight. "We shouldn't be stopped here." Mark didn't argue. He turned the key, the engine roared to life, and he pulled back onto the highway with a spray of gravel. He drove the rest of the way home about 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. The rest of the drive was a blur. The comfortable fatigue from the fishing trip was gone, replaced by a jittery, wide-awake alertness. Every curve in the road felt like a threat. Every time the headlights caught a stump or a weirdly shaped rock, my heart would leap into my throat. We dropped Leo off at his place. He just got out, gave us a nod, and went inside without a word. He looked spooked. Mark drove me to my apartment. We sat in his truck in my parking lot for a minute, the engine running. "You saw it too, right?" I asked him, needing the confirmation one more time. I didn't imagine it. "Yeah," he said, not looking at me. He was staring through the windshield. "I saw it. We didn't say anything else. There was nothing else to say." "See you later," I mumbled, and got out. I went into my apartment, locked the door, and put the chain on. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just went to the window and looked out at the quiet suburban street. It felt fake, the streetlights, the manicured lawns, the parked cars. It all felt like a flimsy set, built over something much older, much darker, and much, much bigger. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my couch in the dark, listening to every little creak and groan of the building, seeing that thing walking in my mind, over and over. The next day, I went to the library. This was before everyone had the internet in their pocket. I looked through old local newspapers, anything about strange sightings in the Modoc or Shasta Trinity areas. And I found them, a handful of reports scattered over decades. A logger in the 70s who saw a giant hairy man cross a clearing. A family in the 80s who reported something throwing rocks at their cabin. Descriptions of a large bipedal creature, reddish-brown hair, an overpowering smell. Reading those old yellowed articles didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. It confirmed that what we saw was real, and that it had been there for a long, long time. I never went back to that part of the forest. Mark and I never really talked about it again. It was just this thing that sat between us, an unspoken understanding of a crack we'd seen in the world. To this day, if I'm driving on a dark road at night, my shoulders tense up, my eyes constantly scan the ditches, the tree lines. I'm not looking for deer, I'm looking for a flicker of movement that's too big, a shape that stands too tall, a shadow that walks with a bent-kneed, rolling gait that doesn't belong to any animal I know. I know what I saw, we all saw it. And sometimes, when the wind is right, I can almost smell the pine trees and feel that cold night air. And I remember with absolute certainty that we are not alone in those woods. Something else is out there, something old and powerful that doesn't care about our roads or our cars or our world. It just walks its own path, in the dark, leaving people like me to forever wonder what it was and to be forever afraid of the shadows between the trees. Story 15. It was December of 2007, and I was up in the Yukon with my trapping partner. We'd been doing this for over 20 years, the two of us, and we knew this stretch of wilderness like the backs of our own hands. That's what made it all so much worse, I think. The fact that we weren't greenhorns, we weren't city kids who got spooked by the dark. We knew the sounds of the woods, every creak and groan, at least we thought we did. The day it happened had been a long, grinding kind of day. The snow had started around noon, just a few lazy flakes, but by the time the sun dipped below the tree line, what little sun there was in December that far north, it was a full-blown storm, a real whiteout. The wind was howling like a live thing, shoving against the walls of our little log cabin. We'd battened down everything, stuffed rags in the cracks around the door, and just hunkered down next to the wood stove. The plan was simple, ride it out. We had enough food, enough firewood stacked inside to last a week if we were careful. We weren't worried, annoyed, sure. A storm like this meant checking the trap lines was out of the question for a couple days, which meant lost income. But worried? No. We'd turned in early, the two of us in our bunks on opposite sides of the single room. The cabin is small, maybe 15 by 15 feet, just a table, 2 chairs, the stove, and our bunks. The roof is low, and you can always smell the pine logs and the damp wool of our clothes. That night, the sound of the wind was so loud, it was almost a physical pressure in my ears. I remember finally drifting off to sleep, thinking that at least the noise would keep the wolves away. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The middle of the night, black as pitch. The storm had died down to a whisper, which was a relief at first. The silence felt heavy after all that racket. I was just starting to sink back into sleep when I heard it. A breath. Not the wind. Not an animal sniffing around. A deep, rhythmic, purposeful breath. In and out. Slow. Like something very, very big was standing just on the other side of the log wall, right next to my head. My eyes snapped open. I was on the bottom bunk and my partner was above me. I held my own breath, listening so hard my ears ached. For a second, there was nothing, just the gentle hiss of the dying embers in the stove. Maybe I dreamed it. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I was about to chalk it up to a nightmare when I heard it again. Ah! It was coming from the north wall. I lay there, frozen stiff, my hand creeping slowly toward the rifle. I kept leaning against the bunk post. My fingers closed around the cold, familiar wood of the stock. Then I heard another one. This one was from the west wall, near the door. The same deep, resonant breathing, a second set. It was slightly different in tone, a little shallower, but the same slow, steady rhythm. That's when the fear really set in. Not a jump scare kind of fear, but a cold, heavy dread that started in my gut and spread outwards, turning my arms and legs to lead. This wasn't a bear. A bear in winter is either asleep or starving and desperate, and it doesn't sound like that. It doesn't breathe with that kind of patience. Then a third one started, from the south side near the small single window. 3 of them. I heard the rustle of blankets from the top bunk. My partner had heard it too. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence between us was louder than any conversation. I could feel his tension from 6 feet away. Slowly, carefully, I swung my legs out of the bunk and stood up. The floorboards were icy under my bare feet. I grabbed my rifle and held it tight, my finger resting alongside the trigger guard. The breathing didn't stop. It was a horrifying, overlapping chorus. In out from the north, in out from the west, in out from the south. They were circling us. I could track their movement just by the sound. They were walking slowly, deliberately around our tiny cabin, and they were doing it in sync. My partner slid down from his bunk. His face was pale in the faint glow from the stove's vent. He had his own rifle in his hands. He pointed 2 fingers at his own eyes, then at the window. I nodded. We moved as quietly as we could, which wasn't very quiet at all. The floor always creaked in this old place. Every sound we made felt like a gunshot in the tense silence between those breaths. We crept to the window. It was a small square of thick, wavy glass, and it was covered on the inside with a thick layer of frost from our breathing. My partner cupped his hands and breathed on the glass, melting a small peephole in the frost. He looked out, and his whole body went rigid. He stayed like that for a full 5 seconds, then slowly backed away from the window. He looked at me, and his eyes were wide with a kind of fear I'd never seen in him before, not even when we'd faced down a grizzly at 10 paces. He just shook his head, a tiny, frantic motion, and gestured for me to look. I took his place at the window. I leaned in, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I put my eye to the little clear spot he'd made. The storm had passed, and a half moon had come out, casting a weak, blue-white light over the snow. It was bright enough to see the tree line, about 30 yards away, and it was bright enough to see them. There were 3 of them. They were huge. I'm not talking tall, I'm talking massive. All of them had to be over 8 feet tall, easy. They were covered in dark hair, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was coarser, stringier, like a horse's mane. Their shoulders were impossibly wide, barrel chests that tapered down to narrower waists. Their arms were long, hanging down past their knees, and they moved with a strange, fluid silence. The snow was deep, up to a man's thigh in places, but they didn't lumber or struggle. They just walked, and they made no sound. No crunch of snow, no snap of a twig. Just that low, steady breathing. The one on the left was slightly smaller than the other 2, but still gigantic. The one on the right was broad, its head seeming to sit directly on its shoulders. But the one in the middle, it was the biggest. It was a head taller than the others, and its chest was like a 50-gallon drum, and they were positioned perfectly. One to the north, one to the west, one to the south, a triangle. They had us surrounded. They weren't just wandering around, they were coordinating. As I watched, the one on the south took 2 slow steps to its left, and at the same time, the one on the north took 2 steps to its right, maintaining the formation. They were working together. They were intelligent. I pulled back from the window, my skin crawling. I felt sick. My partner was leaning against the wall, his rifle held so tight his knuckles were white. "What are they?" he whispered, his voice cracking. It was the first thing either of us had said. I just shook my head. I didn't have an answer. Bigfoot. Sasquatch. I'd heard the stories, laughed at them around campfires, but this wasn't a story. This was 3 tons of muscle and hair and quiet, terrifying intelligence standing between us and the rest of the world. That's when the breathing from the west wall got louder. It was the big one. It was moving closer to the door. We could hear the soft, heavy thumps of its footsteps now. Not because it was being careless, but because it was so close we could feel the vibrations through the floor. The breathing was right there on the other side of the door. I could hear each inhalation, a deep, wet sound, and each exhalation, a low rumble. Then the smell hit us. It was a musky odor, so strong it was almost a taste in the back of my throat. It smelled like a wet dog, but 100 times worse, mixed with something else, something rotten and earthy, like old meat and damp soil. It filled the cabin, overpowering the scent of pine and wood smoke. The door was a solid slab of wood, but it felt as thin as paper. We both raised our rifles, pointing them at the door. My arms were trembling. We were 2 experienced men with high-powered rifles, and I've never felt more helpless in my life. If it wanted to come in, that door wasn't going to stop it. We heard a soft, scraping sound against the wood. Then a shadow fell over the crack of light under the door. It was standing right there. I could picture it, that huge dark form, its face just inches from the door. I expected it to pound on the door, to roar, to try and break it down. It didn't. It bent down. I saw the shadow under the door get larger as it crouched. I could hear its breathing more clearly than ever, a slow, patient ha-ha-ha sound. It was inspecting the door. It was looking at the latch, the hinges. It was studying it. The intelligence of that simple act was more frightening than any mindless charge. This thing wasn't just an animal, it was thinking, it was assessing. The other two had gone quiet. The triangle was still there, I could feel it, but they were holding their positions, waiting. We were trapped. There was no back door. The only way out was through that door, and they were all waiting for us on the other side. The window was too small to crawl through quickly. We were in a box, and they were the lid. I don't know how long we stood there, rifles aimed, not daring to move, not daring to breathe too loud. It felt like an hour. It was probably less than 10 minutes. My finger was cramping from how hard I was gripping the rifle. The smell was so thick, I felt like I was choking on it. The only sound was that breathing right on the other side of the door and the frantic beating of my own heart. And then it stopped. The breathing just stopped. The shadow under the door shifted and then vanished. We stood there, frozen, waiting for the attack. It had to be a trick. It was going to smash through the wall. It was going to come through the roof. But nothing happened. A minute passed. Then another. I risked a glance at my partner. He looked as confused and terrified as I felt. I gestured toward the window. He shook his head violently. I insisted, nodding toward it. We had to know. We crept back to the window together. I had to wipe a new layer of frost away with my sleeve. I looked out. They were leaving. The big one was walking away from the cabin, back toward the tree line to the west. It wasn't hurrying. It walked with that same slow, deliberate, silent pace. The other two were also moving away, one to the north, one to the south. They didn't look back. They just melted into the dark shadows of the spruce trees, one by one, until the forest swallowed them whole. The silence they left behind was almost as terrifying as their presence. It was a heavy, ringing silence. We didn't move from that window for a long time. We just stared out at the empty, moonlit snow, waiting for them to come back. They didn't. The sky began to lighten from black to a deep, cold blue. Dawn was coming. We still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. When the sun finally peeked over the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the snow, I finally unlocked the door. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the simple bolt. I opened the door a crack, then all the way. The cold morning air was clean and sharp, a relief after the stifling musk. I stepped outside, my rifle still held ready, and I saw the footprints. They were everywhere, a perfect circle of them around our cabin, about 10 feet out from the walls. The snow was packed down from their pacing. The prints were huge. I knelt down next to one. I pulled out my tape measure from my pocket, 16 inches long. 16. My own boot is a size 12, and it looked like a child's print next to it. The depth of the prints showed an incredible weight. But it was the other marks that made the hair on my neck stand up again. In several places, right beside the huge footprints, there were other impressions in the snow. They weren't footprints. They were longer, with a palm-like shape, and 5 distinct finger-like depressions. They looked like someone, or something, with massive hands had leaned down and placed its hand in the snow to steady itself while it peered at our cabin. That's when the full reality of it hit me. They hadn't just been circling us. They had been inspecting us, the big one at the door, the others holding their positions. They had been working as a team. They had been curious. They had looked at our door, they had looked in our window, and then, for reasons I will never, ever understand, they had decided to leave us alone. We packed up our gear and got out of there that same morning. We didn't even check the trap lines. We just started walking and didn't stop until we hit the nearest outfitter's post 2 days later. We told the guy there we'd had some trouble with a bear and cut our trip short. He probably didn't believe us, but he didn't press it. I've never gone back to that part of the territory. My partner and I, we don't talk about it much. What is there to say? We saw what we saw. We were there. We felt their breath through the walls. We smelled their stink. We saw their hands in the snow. We were two experienced trappers, men who knew the woods, and we were reduced to two terrified kids, frozen in a little log cabin, completely at the mercy of something we couldn't explain. And the most chilling part, the part that still keeps me up at night sometimes, isn't that they attacked. It's that they didn't. They just looked us over, decided we weren't worth the trouble, and walked away into the trees like they owned the place. And maybe out there, in that vast, empty wilderness, they do. Story 16. It was early April, a Tuesday morning, I think. The kind of morning that starts off so normal you don't even think about it. That's the part that gets me now, how absolutely ordinary it all was right up until it wasn't. I was up at my usual time, a little before 7. The coffee was brewing, that bitter smell filling the kitchen. My dog, a big old mutt named Rex, was scratching at the back door, his tail thumping against the frame. He always does that when he needs to go out. I live out in White County, Georgia, way off the main road. My driveway is gravel, about 100 yards long, cutting through a mix of pine trees and hardwoods before it meets the county blacktop. It's quiet out here, the kind of quiet you can feel in your bones. I let Rex out and stood by the sink, waiting for the coffee to finish, just staring out the window at the grey light of dawn. The woods were still thick with shadow. I remember seeing a couple of deer picking their way along the tree line a few days before, and my first thought that morning was maybe they were back. Rex usually bolts off into the underbrush to do his business, but that morning he didn't. He just stood on the back steps, his head cocked, ears perked up. He let out this low whine, not a bark, just this uneasy sound from deep in his chest. I figured maybe he'd heard a coon or a possum, something that spooked him. The coffee maker hissed and sputtered, so I turned away from the window to pour a mug. That's when I decided I needed to grab a package off the front porch that had been delivered the night before. I walked through the living room, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and pulled open the front door. The air was cool and damp, smelling of pine needles and wet earth. I took a step out onto the porch, my bare feet on the cold, rough wood, and that's when I saw them. They were crossing my driveway, not running, not walking fast, just moving. It was maybe 7:30 in the morning. The light was still soft and hazy, but it was bright enough to see clearly. There were two of them. They were upright, on two legs, just like a person, but they weren't people, not even close. They were covered head to toe in this dark brown, almost blackish hair. It wasn't shaggy like a bear's, it was more like a thick, matted pelt. The bigger one was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least a foot taller than me, maybe more. 7 feet easy. Its shoulders were massive, just these great slabs of muscle under all that hair. The other one was shorter, thinner, but still bigger than any man I've ever seen. They were moving from the thicker woods on the left side of my property, heading across the gravel drive towards a denser patch of pines and oaks on the right. Their movement was what got me first. It was so smooth. There was no clumping, no heavy-footed stumble. It was a glide, a powerful, effortless stride that covered ground without seeming to try. Their arms swung naturally at their sides, long and heavy. My brain just short-circuited. I stood there on my porch, a stupid ceramic mug in my hand, my mouth probably hanging open. The first thought, the automatic one, was bear. But bears don't walk like that. Their back legs are built different. They have a hunch, a roll to their gait. This was different. This was a purposeful, upright walk, a person's walk. But it wasn't a person in a suit. I've seen videos, you know, the guys in the gorilla costumes at the zoo. This wasn't that. The proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the shoulders too broad. The head seemed to sit directly on those huge shoulders with no real neck, and they never looked at me. That was the second thing that froze the blood in my veins. They were maybe 40, 50 feet away, cutting right across my path, and neither one of them turned their head. Not a glance. The big one was in front, the smaller one a few steps behind. They just kept moving with this quiet, terrifying purpose, like they were on a schedule, and I was just part of the scenery. It was as if I was so insignificant, so not a threat, that I wasn't even worth acknowledging. The silence was the third thing. Gravel crunches, leaves rustle, twigs snap. They made no sound. None. Their feet, whatever they were, hit the gravel, and it was like they were made of smoke. I heard the distant call of a crow. I heard the hum of my refrigerator from inside the house, but I didn't hear a single footfall from them. It was unnatural. It was wrong. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds. From the moment I stepped onto the porch to the moment the smaller one disappeared into the shadow of the trees on the other side. 10 seconds that rewired my entire understanding of the world. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood there, the coffee mug getting cold in my hand. My heart wasn't pounding. It felt like it had stopped entirely, a cold, hard stone in my chest. My breath was stuck in my throat. It was a pure, primal fear, the kind that doesn't come from thinking about monsters in a movie, but from some deep, ancient part of your brain that recognizes a predator you didn't even know existed. Rex was suddenly beside me, pressing his whole body against my leg. He was trembling, a full-body shake, and he let out another one of those low, scared whines. He'd seen it too, or smelled it, or felt it. However dogs know these things, he knew. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been a minute, it could have been 10. Eventually, some basic survival instinct kicked in, and I stumbled back inside, locking the door behind me, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the deadbolt. I leaned against the door, sliding down to sit on the floor, Rex crowding into my lap, both of us just sitting there in the quiet of my own home, which suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. I spent the rest of the morning jumping at every little sound. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows, made my skin crawl. I kept peering out the windows, my heart in my throat, expecting to see one of those dark shapes standing at the edge of the tree line, just watching the house. But I saw nothing. The woods were just woods again. By midday, the initial shock had worn off enough for a different feeling to set in, a desperate, clawing need for proof. I had to know I hadn't lost my mind. I had to see something tangible. I pulled on my boots, my hands still unsteady, and grabbed a hatchet from the shed. It felt stupid and small in my hand, but I needed to hold something. Rex didn't want to come. I had to practically drag him out the door. He stayed right on my heels, his tail tucked between his legs, his head on a swivel, constantly looking back towards the house. I walked to the spot where I'd seen them cross the driveway. The gravel was disturbed, of course it was, but there, in a patch of softer dirt at the edge of the drive, I saw them. Footprints. They were huge. I wear a size 12 boot, and I placed my foot next to one of the prints. It was easily half again as long and twice as wide. The shape was human-like, but the proportions were off. The ball of the foot was broad and the toes. They seemed to splay out, and there was no clear arch. It was just a long, flat impression pushed deep into the mud. I followed the trail with my eyes. They led from the woods, across the drive, and into the other patch of trees. The stride was immense. I'm a tall guy, and my normal walking step is maybe 2.5, 3 feet. These impressions were at least 5, 6 feet apart. It confirmed the smooth, gliding walk I'd seen. They weren't just tall, they were powerful. I didn't follow the trail into the woods. I wasn't that brave or that stupid. Just standing there at the edge, looking into that wall of green, made the hair on my arms stand up. It felt like the trees themselves were watching me. That's when I remembered the salt block. I keep a white salt lick out in the back field for the deer. It's a heavy thing, maybe 40 pounds. I walked around the house to check on it, Rex still glued to my side. It was flipped over. Not just nudged, but completely turned upside down, and it was broken. A large chunk, maybe a third of the whole block, had been snapped clean off. It wasn't cracked. It was a clean break, like it had been bitten. The piece was gone. There were no marks on the ground around it, no tire tracks, nothing. Just the overturned, broken block and those same huge footprints pressed into the grass nearby. That's when the full weight of it all really hit me. This wasn't a fleeting glimpse. Something had been here. Something strong enough to flip a heavy salt block and bite a chunk out of it like it was a cookie. Something that walked on two legs and was covered in hair and was taller than any man. I went back inside and locked every door and window. I didn't know what else to do. I thought about calling the sheriff, but what would I say? Hey, I just saw Bigfoot and his friend cross my driveway and they broke my salt lick. They'd think I was a drunk or crazy. I've lived out here my whole life. I'm a respected member of this community, and the thought of saying those words out loud to someone in a uniform made me feel sick with embarrassment, even through the fear. So I didn't report it. I just sat there, in my silent house, with my terrified dog and tried to process it. The rest of the day was a blur of nervous energy. I'd pace, then sit, then jump up to look out a window. As the sun started to go down, the fear just grew. Night was coming. Whatever was out there was a creature of the woods, and the woods belonged to the night. It got dark. I didn't turn on many lights. I just sat in my living room in the dim glow of a single lamp, the TV off, just listening. The woods at night are never silent. There's always the chirping of crickets, the peeping of frogs from the creek. But that night, there were long stretches of absolute quiet. It was a dead, heavy silence that felt more threatening than any noise. And then the knocks started. It was around 10 o'clock. The first one was so loud and sharp it made me jolt upright in my chair. It wasn't a branch falling, it wasn't a tree cracking in the cold. It was a knock, a deep, resonant thwack sound, like someone had taken a giant sledgehammer to the trunk of a solid oak tree. It came from the woods to the right, the same direction they had gone. Rex, who had been dozing fitfully at my feet, shot up, a guttural growl rumbling in his chest. He stared out the dark window, his body rigid. A few minutes later, another one answered from the left side woods. Thwack, equally loud, equally deliberate. It wasn't random, it was communication. One would knock, and a few seconds or a minute later another would answer from a different part of the woods. They were talking to each other, and they were surrounding the house. I sat there in that chair, my knuckles white where I was gripping the arms, listening to this primal, terrifying conversation happening in the dark just beyond my property line. Each knock was a jolt of pure adrenaline straight to my heart. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there listening, waiting for something I couldn't even imagine. The knocks went on for hours, sometimes close, sometimes farther away, before they finally stopped just before dawn. That was the day. That one single, endless day. But it didn't end there. It's never really ended. In the weeks since, I've seen things, not full-on sightings like that morning, but shapes. At dawn, or just after dusk, when the light plays tricks, I'll see a dark, upright shape moving between the trees at the far edge of the field. It's always just at the limit of my vision, there and then gone. Rex still gets nervous at night, his ears perking up at sounds I can't hear. His low growl, a constant reminder that I'm not alone out here. I never took any pictures. By the time I thought of it that first day, the footprints had been washed away by a rain shower that afternoon. What would a blurry picture of trees prove anyway? So this is my account. This is what happened to me on a Tuesday morning in early April. I saw them, I heard them, I know they're out there. And every time I look out my window at those woods, I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. Because I know, with a certainty that sits like a cold rock in my gut, that I am not just the one who lives here. I'm the one being watched. Story 17. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been carrying it around for decades, and I guess I just need to put it somewhere. Maybe someone out there has heard something similar. I don't know. My name's Wayne. Back in the late 80s, I was a deputy for the Lee County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina. The date was July 24th, 1988, a Sunday. I remember that because my wife had wanted me to go to church with her and the kids, but I was on call. It was one of those stifling summer days where the air feels like a wet wool blanket, thick and heavy, and you're sweating just from breathing, the kind of heat that makes the asphalt on the back roads look like it's shimmering, like a mirage. The call came in around 2 in the afternoon. It wasn't a normal dispatch. It was the sheriff, Trusaile himself, on the line. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the confusion underneath. He said there were complaints coming out of the Browntown area, not the usual domestic or property damage stuff. People were reporting noises, things being thrown around, a real ruckus. But the way they were describing it, it wasn't kids or drunks. He told me to head out there, and he'd already called the state patrol, so a trooper would be meeting me. That was Mike Hodge. I met Mike on the dirt track that leads into the heart of Browntown. It's not really a town, more a scattering of old houses and trailers deep in the woods, the kind of place where folks keep to themselves. Mike was leaning against his cruiser, already looking uncomfortable. He was a good guy, solid, built like a linebacker. Seeing him uneasy made the back of my neck prickle. We exchanged a nod, no handshake, just a shared sense that this was already weird. The first thing that hit me was the silence. Normally, out in the woods like that, you've got birds, insects, the rustle of squirrels in the leaves. This was different. It was a dead quiet, the kind that feels heavy, like something was holding its breath and waiting for us to leave. The air was absolutely still. We started walking towards the source of the complaints, an old scrapyard on a piece of property belonging to a man named Old Man Riggins. He was the one who'd called it in. Before we even saw anything, the smell hit us. It was a mix of things, rotting garbage for sure, but underneath it was something else, something musky and sour like wet dog and old meat. It was strong enough to make my eyes water. Then we saw the drums. They were these big 44-gallon industrial drums, the heavy-duty metal ones. They were scattered around the clearing, but they weren't just knocked over. They were crushed, flattened. The metal wasn't just dented, it was crumpled like a beer can in a giant's fist. Mike and I just stood there for a minute, staring. I remember running my hand over the creased metal. It was cold to the touch, and the force required to do that. It didn't make sense. You'd need a vehicle, a compactor, something with serious hydraulic power. There were no tire tracks, nothing. That's when Mike pointed up. High up in the pine trees, maybe 9-10 feet off the ground, branches were snapped clean off. Not broken and hanging, but snapped. The white, splintery wood stark against the green. They were thick branches too, the kind you'd need loppers or a saw for. Something had just broken them, like swatting a fly. We both had our sidearms, but I remember the feeling of my service revolver feeling suddenly very, very small, useless. We started calling out, "Sheriff's office," but our voices just got swallowed by that thick, heavy silence. And that's when the feeling started, that feeling of being watched. It's a cliché, I know, but it's a cliché because it's real. It wasn't a vague sensation, it was a specific, focused pressure. Something in the wall of trees to our west was looking right at us. I could feel it on my skin, a cold spot on a hot day. Mike felt it too. I saw his hand drop to his holster, his knuckles white. He didn't draw, but he was ready. We stood back to back for a second, just scanning the tree line. The woods were dark, even in the middle of the day, the canopy so thick it blocked out most of the sun. We couldn't see anything moving, but the feeling was so intense, it was almost a physical force. It was pure, animal-level fear, the kind that bypasses your brain and goes straight to your spine. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. We decided to move, to get out of the clearing. Staying still felt too much like being a target. We headed back towards the cars, but we took a wider path, skirting the edge of the property. That's when we found the footprints. They were in a patch of hard-packed earth near a dried-up creek bed. The ground was sun-baked clay, tough as concrete, but sunk into it, clear as day, were a line of footprints. They were huge, I'm 6 feet tall, and I put my boot next to one. My size 11 boot looked like a child's shoe next to it. These things had to be at least 14 inches long, and the stride, Mike pasted out, 4 feet easy. A normal man takes a 2.5, 3 foot stride at most. This thing was taking massive loping steps. The shape was all wrong too. It was humanoid, bipedal, but the toes were long and there was no real arch. It was just a long, flat foot with these distinct toe impressions at the front. The depth of the prints was what got me, to sink that deep into ground that hard. Whatever made them had to be unbelievably heavy. We're talking several hundred pounds minimum. Mike radioed it into the sheriff, his voice cracking a little. He described the prints, the stride. There was a long silence from the other end before Sheriff Truesdale came back on, telling us to not follow them, to wait for backup. But we were already looking at where they led, right into the thickest, nastiest part of the brush, a wall of brambles and young pines. The feeling of being watched was coming from that direction. It was an invitation, and it was a threat. We looked at each other, and without a word, we both knew we had to see. It was our job. It was also the dumbest decision of my life. We started following the tracks. Pushing through that brush was a nightmare. Thorns tore at my uniform shirt, scratching my arms. The air was even thicker in there, and that smell, that musky, foul smell, was stronger. It was like walking into its bedroom. We hadn't gone more than 50 yards when the sky, which had been a hazy blue, just turned off. The clouds rolled in faster than any clouds I'd ever seen, dark and bruised looking. The wind picked up, whipping the trees around, and that dead silence was replaced by the roar of an approaching storm. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in what felt like a minute. Lightning flashed, a brilliant white fork that lit up the woods for a split second, and in that flash, I saw it, or I saw something. Further in, maybe 70, 80 yards ahead, standing between two trees. It was just a shape, a massive, dark, bipedal shape. It was huge, way taller than a man. It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing us. It was so dark, it seemed to suck the light out of the air around it. Then the thunder crashed, so loud it felt like it was inside my skull, and the shape was gone. The rain started, a cold, hard downpour that felt like needles on my skin. That was it. We were done. We turned and practically ran back the way we came, slipping in the mud that was already forming, thorns tearing at us, not caring. We burst out of the tree line and scrambled to our cars. We sat in my cruiser, both of us breathing like we'd just run a marathon, the rain hammering on the roof. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We just waited for the sheriff. When Sheriff Truesdale showed up, the storm was in full force. We showed him the crushed drums, the broken branches, and by some miracle the footprints were still there, though the rain was already starting to wash them away. He looked at them, looked at the crushed metal, and just shook his head. He was a practical man, a former Marine. He didn't have a box to put this in. He was puzzled, and seeing him like that scared me more than anything else. Later, after the rain had slowed to a drizzle, he brought out a couple of bloodhounds from a guy he knew. Those dogs were supposed to be the best. They went straight to the footprints, sniffed around, and then nothing. They whined, they circled, they put their noses to the ground and then looked up, confused. They couldn't pick up a trail. It was like the scent just started there or ended there. One of the hounds just laid down and refused to move, its ears drooping. The handler was embarrassed, said he'd never seen anything like it. We stood there in the muddy clearing, the three of us, watching the dogs fail. The feeling of being watched was gone, washed away by the rain. But the mystery was left, solid and heavy, a bipedal creature, impossibly strong, that left footprints in concrete hard ground, that broke trees 9 feet in the air, that crushed steel drums for fun or out of rage, and that vanished without a scent for a bloodhound to follow. We filed a report, of course. It was full of facts, measurements, descriptions, times. It didn't contain what we felt. It didn't capture the sheer primal terror of knowing something that powerful was standing there in the trees, looking back at you. It didn't explain the silence, or the smell, or the way the storm came out of nowhere, as if to protect it, to hide it. I went back to my life. I did my job, I raised my kids, but I never went into those woods again. Not for any reason, and sometimes, on a still, hot July night, if I'm outside and the wind is just right, I'll catch a whiff of something on the air, a faint, musky odor like wet dog and old meat, and my heart will start that same frantic hammering. And for a second, I'm 30 years younger, standing in a clearing, feeling smaller and more exposed than I ever have in my life, knowing that something is still out there and that we never ever solved it. Story 18. That night, it was a Tuesday, I think, because I remember I'd spent the day splitting firewood and was tired as hell. The house was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, so I'd stoked the wood stove in the living room and settled into my armchair with a book. Rex was curled up on the rug near my feet, snoring lightly. Everything was quiet, the way it always was out there, just the wind whistling through the cracks in the old window frames and the occasional creak of the house settling. I liked the solitude most of the time, but that night it felt heavier, like the silence was pressing in on me. It must have been around midnight when Rex suddenly lifted his head and let out this low, rumbling growl. Not his usual "I heard a squirrel" growl, but something deeper, more guttural, like his whole body was vibrating with it. I set my book down, my heart already starting to thump a little faster. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, and he didn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the big picture window that looked out into the backyard. The curtains were open, and outside it was pitch black, except for the faint glow of snow on the ground. We'd had a light snowfall earlier that day, just enough to coat everything in a thin, white layer. I stood up slowly, my joints aching from the cold, and walked over to the window. At first, I didn't see anything, just the dark shapes of trees and the outline of the woods beyond the yard. But then Rex growled again, louder this time, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I reached for the switch on the wall and flicked on the porch light. That's when I saw it. My breath caught in my throat, and I swear my legs turned to jelly. There, right outside the window, was this massive white figure, so close that its face was almost pressed against the glass. It was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and built like a damn bear, but standing upright. Its body was covered in coarse, pure white hair from head to toe, thick and matted in places, like it had been rolling in snow or something. But it wasn't just the size that got me, it was the eyes. They were this piercing yellow color, glowing faintly in the light, and they were locked right on me, unblinking, just staring. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a bear? No, bears don't stand like that, and they sure as hell don't have eyes like that. This thing was different. Its face was broad, with a flat nose and a heavy brow, but the skin around its eyes was dark, almost black, contrasting with the white hair, and it was so still. Not a twitch, not a sound. Just this intense, silent watching. Rex was going nuts now, barking and snarling, his hackles raised. The sound snapped me out of my daze a little, and I took a hesitant step forward, closer to the window. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some stupid curiosity or just pure instinct. But the thing didn't move. It didn't flinch or run away. Instead, it slowly turned its head, just a slight tilt, and I saw its breath fog up the glass. A soft white cloud formed on the pane, and for a second it blurred its features. Then it lowered itself, not like it crouched, but more like it slid downward, disappearing from view so smoothly it was almost graceful. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Once it was gone, I stood there, trembling, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Rex was still growling, but now he was backing away from the window, his tail tucked between his legs. I forced myself to move, stumbling to the door and flipping on the outside floodlights. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the knob. I stepped out onto the porch, the cold air hitting me like a slap. The snow crunched under my boots, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. I scanned the backyard, but there was nothing there, just the empty yard and the dark line of trees beyond. But then I looked down, and my blood ran cold. There, in the snow, were footprints, huge, deep impressions leading from the woods right up to the window and then back again. They were longer than my own foot by a good few inches and wider, with a distinct shape, like a human foot but broader, with toes that splayed out. The stride was long, like whatever made them was taking big, purposeful steps. I followed the tracks with my eyes, tracing them back toward the woods. They disappeared into the trees, but not before I noticed something else. Near the edge of the forest, there was a spot where the snow was disturbed, like something had been standing there for a while. My stomach churned. I wanted to go investigate, but fear held me back. What if it was still out there watching me? I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me and leaning against it, my chest heaving. Rex was hiding under the kitchen table, whining softly. I tried to coax him out, but he wouldn't budge. That's when it really hit me, how scared he was. Rex wasn't a coward. He'd faced down raccoons and even a coyote once without backing down. But this had terrified him. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with all the lights on, my shotgun across my lap, though I doubt it would have done much good. Every little noise made me jump. The house creaking, the wind howling, even the fridge kicking on. I kept peeking out the window, half expecting to see those yellow eyes staring back at me, but there was nothing. As the sun started to come up, I finally worked up the nerve to go outside again. The footprints were still there, clear as day in the morning light. I took a tape measure from my toolbox and checked them. They were about 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. Deep, too, like whatever made them was heavy. I followed them into the woods a little way, but I didn't go far. The trees were thick, and the silence felt oppressive. That's when I saw the stick. It was leaning against a tree trunk, about chest height for me, a thick, gnarled branch, maybe 4 feet long, propped up like someone had placed it there deliberately. It wasn't broken or anything. It looked like it had been picked up and set there. My skin crawled. Why would anyone do that or anything? I thought about Bigfoot stories I'd heard, Sasquatch they call it, but I'd never put much stock in them, and I'd never ever heard of a white one. Most accounts talk about dark brown or black hair. This thing was pure white, like it was made of snow itself. I went back to the house, my mind racing. Over the next few days, things got weirder. Rex refused to go near that window anymore. He'd skirt around it, giving it a wide berth, and if I tried to lead him over, he'd plant his feet and whine. The motion sensor light on the porch started triggering randomly at night, even when there was nothing there. I'd look out, and the yard would be empty, but the light would be on, casting long shadows. Once, around 2 in the morning, it went off, and I saw fresh tracks in the snow, same size, same shape, leading up to the house and then circling back into the woods. I tried to tell myself it was a bear or a person playing a prank, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Bears don't leave footprints like that, and no person could be that big or move that quietly. And the eyes, those glowing yellow eyes, haunted my dreams. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, but I barely slept at all. Every night I'd lie awake, listening, waiting for something to happen. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. Even during the day, when I was outside chopping wood or checking the mail, I'd get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was staring at me from the trees. I'd spin around, but there'd be nothing there, just the woods, dark and silent. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Hey, there's a big white monster in my backyard. They'd think I was crazy. So I kept it to myself, just me and Rex, living in this creeping dread. About a week after that first night, I found more tracks. This time, they came right up to the back door, like whatever it was had been standing there, looking in. The hair on my arms stood up. I reinforced the locks and nailed a board across the bottom of the door, but it felt pointless. This thing was smart, deliberate. It wasn't just wandering, it was observing. I never saw it again after that first time, but the evidence was there. The stick stayed propped against the tree for days until a heavy snow covered it. Rex never fully got over it. He'd still get nervous at night, especially near that window. I moved out a few months later, couldn't take the stress anymore. Sold the place to a young couple who didn't ask too many questions. To this day, I have no idea what I saw. Was it a Sasquatch? Some kind of mutant animal? I don't know. All I know is that night, staring into those yellow eyes, I felt a fear so deep and primal that it stuck with me ever since. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still get that feeling, like something's out there, watching, waiting, and I wonder if it's still around, that white thing in the snow, just biding its time. Dinasidoan, Story 19. It was a Saturday in early November. I remember because the leaves were mostly gone and the woods felt bare and exposed. I'd decided to go out to this spot I knew about an hour from where I lived, a place I used to hike to clear my head. Life had been stressful. Work stuff, you know how it is. And I needed the quiet. The air was cold that morning, the kind that bites at your cheeks if you're not moving fast enough, and I'd bundled up in an old jacket and jeans. I parked my car off this dirt road that barely saw any traffic, grabbed my backpack with some water and a sandwich, and started walking. The sun was out, but it was weak, like it didn't really want to be there either. The trail wasn't marked or anything, just a path I'd worn down over the years. It winds through these dense pines at first, then opens up into a valley with a creek running through it. I've always loved it there because it's so isolated. You don't hear cars or people, just the wind and sometimes animals. That day, though, things felt different right from the start. I can't put my finger on why, but the silence was heavier, like the woods were holding their breath. I remember stopping for a second to listen, and all I heard was my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. It was weird, but I shrugged it off. Figured I was just jumpy from not sleeping well the night before. I kept walking, following the creek for a while. The ground was muddy in spots from recent rain, and my boots sank in a little with each step. That's when I noticed the first thing that made me pause. Off to the side of the path, there were these footprints, not like deer or raccoon tracks. I've seen plenty of those. These were big, like really big, and deep, like whatever made them was heavy. They were shaped kind of human-like, but too large, maybe twice the size of my own foot. I'm not a tracker or anything, but I've spent enough time outdoors to know that didn't look right. My stomach tightened a bit, and I remember thinking, what the hell is that? But again, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear. I'd heard they could leave prints that look odd sometimes, but bears don't usually walk on two legs like that. The prints seemed to be in a straight line, pacing along the trail like someone or something had been following it. I shook my head and kept going, telling myself I was being paranoid. The sun was higher now, but it didn't warm things up much. I found a spot near the creek to sit and eat my sandwich. The water was rushing pretty loud, which usually calms me down, but today it just felt like noise covering up something else. I was chewing on my turkey sandwich when I heard it. A low sound, like a deep grumble, coming from the trees across the creek. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the ground, and I felt it in my chest. My breath hitched and I froze mid-bite. I strained to listen, but the creak was too loud. For a second I thought it might be my imagination, but then it came again, longer this time, like a growl but deeper, almost like rocks grinding together. My heart started pounding faster, and I stood up slowly, packing my stuff away. My hands were trembling, and I had to force myself to breathe normally. I decided to head back early. Something just didn't feel right. As I started walking back the way I came, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The woods felt like they were closing in on me. The trees, which usually felt friendly, now seemed like they were hiding things. Every shadow made me jump. I remember the smell hitting me then, this awful, musky odor, like rotten meat and wet dog. It was so strong, it made my eyes water, and I had to cover my nose with my jacket sleeve. That's when the fear really set in. I've smelled dead animals before, but this was different, more concentrated, like whatever it was had been close recently. I picked up my pace, my boots squelching in the mud. The footprints I'd seen earlier were still there, but now I noticed more of them, leading off into the thicker woods. My mind was racing, trying to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a moose. But moose don't smell like that, and their tracks are different. I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the cold, and my jacket felt too tight. I kept telling myself, just get to the car, just get to the car. But the trail seemed longer than usual, like the woods were stretching out on purpose. Then I heard branches snapping behind me. Not little twigs, but big ones, like something heavy was moving through the trees. I spun around, but I couldn't see anything through the dense pines. My breath was coming in short gasps now, and I started half walking, half jogging. The sound kept pace with me, always just out of sight. I remember the feeling of being watched. It was so intense, like eyes were boring into my back. I've never felt anything like that before. It was a physical weight, making the hairs on my arms stand up. I reached a part of the trail where it climbs a small hill, and I had to slow down because my legs were burning. That's when I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, maybe 50 yards away, there was this figure. It was tall, way taller than a person, and covered in dark, shaggy hair. It was standing on two legs, just watching me. I froze completely, my blood running cold. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe for a second. It was like my brain short-circuited. The thing was massive with broad shoulders, and it seemed to blend into the shadows, but I could see its outline against the lighter background of the trees. It didn't move, just stood there, and I felt this primal fear wash over me, the kind that tells you you're not at the top of the food chain. My body finally kicked into gear, and I turned and ran. I didn't look back, just sprinted as fast as I could, my backpack bouncing and my lungs screaming. I could hear it moving behind me, heavy footsteps thudding on the ground, and that growling sound got louder, like it was right on my heels. Branches whipped at my face, and I didn't care. I just kept running. The smell was everywhere, choking me, and I thought I was going to vomit. I don't know how long I ran, it felt like forever, but I finally burst out of the trees and saw my car up ahead. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice. When I finally got the door open, I scrambled inside and locked it, panting and sobbing. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the woods, waiting for it to come out. But nothing happened. The woods were quiet again, like nothing had ever been there. I drove home in a daze, my whole body trembling. I didn't tell anyone for a long time because I thought they'd think I was crazy. Even now, I can still smell that stench and feel those eyes on me. I never went back to that spot, and I don't think I ever will. Whatever that was, it felt ancient and angry, and I know I was lucky to get away. I still have nightmares about it, and sometimes when I'm in the woods, I get that same feeling of being watched. I don't have any answers, and that's the scariest part. It just happened, and then it was over, but it changed me forever.